Welcome to Cozy Vintage Studio. Tonight you'll rest in 1940s New York, where the rain falls softly over taxis and neon reflections, and a quiet story unfolds between memory and rediscovery. It's a rainy autumn day, and we follow Arnold, an elderly man visiting his daughter after years away, as he wanders through the familiar streets of Manhattan. He sees ghosts of his younger self, a time when he was a confident broker, chasing fortune through echoing corridors of Wall Street. But today the city feels gentler, like it's speaking to him in raindrops and reflections. There's a paradox in nights like this. The world outside rushes and glistens, yet your mind slows down, listening to every heartbeat of the city. What does it mean to return? Not just to a place, but to a version of yourself that time almost forgot. Through cafe windows, forgotten songs, and soft conversations, Arnold will rediscover the quiet magic hidden in everyday moments. The same magic that still lives in every corner of New York will walk beside him through rain-dappled mornings, music-filled evenings, and a peaceful night beneath the city lights. Take a slow breath, and let's begin the story. The train slid into Grand Central, as if trying not to wake the city. Steam rose from the platform, wrapping around the passengers, who stepped into the cool morning air. Arnold stood still for a moment before moving, one gloved hand gripping the handle of his worn leather suitcase. He had forgotten the sound of New York mornings, the echo of shoes on marble, the low murmur of voices, the distant clang of metal against metal. Even through the haze, he could smell coffee from the cart by the gate. It was the same scent that used to greet him on his way to work decades ago. Outside, the city yawned awake under the first breath of rain. A row of yellow taxis shimmered along the curb, their roofs reflecting the pale light. The rain was gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if the sky itself was stretching after a long sleep. Arnold raised his hat, tilted his head up, and smiled. He had arrived. He hailed a cab, his voice soft but sure. The driver, a young man with slicked hair and a cigarette between his fingers, leaned out and nodded. "Where to, sir?" Arnold hesitated. He could have said his daughter's address, on West 74, but instead he murmured, "Let's drive a while." The cab pulled away from the station, its tires hissing through shallow puddles. Outside the window, buildings passed like old acquaintances, grey facades, rain-darkened bricks, fire escapes winding like metal vines. He watched people hurry beneath umbrellas, collars turned up, eyes lowered. It was the same rhythm he remembered, purposeful, restless, alive. When he had first come to this city, he was barely 20. Back then, the station had been brighter, louder, and he had walked with a kind of hunger in his step. Now his movements were slower, but the feeling inside him, the quiet awe of being in New York, had not dimmed. The cab turned along Lexington, past a row of storefronts half hidden by mist. In a bakery window, warm light glowed against the fog. Arnold caught sight of his reflection in the glass, a lined face, eyes thoughtful but not sad. He realized he hadn't looked at himself properly in weeks. The reflection looked back, curious, almost questioning. A sudden horn startled him. The driver muttered something about traffic and swerved slightly. Rain had begun to fall harder, drumming against the roof. Arnold leaned closer to the window, mesmerized by the rhythm. The droplets seemed to race each other down the glass, twisting and merging before disappearing into thin streams. At the corner, a paperboy shouted headlines. Election talks continue. Stock stable again. The words echoed faintly in Arnold's mind. Stocks, markets, numbers, all once the language of his days. He had lived inside those words for 30 years, breathing them like air. But now, hearing them was like overhearing a story he used to know by heart, but could no longer repeat. He asked the driver to stop near Bryant Park. The man shrugged, pulled over, and Arnold paid him with a few folded bills. "Keep the change," he said, stepping out into the drizzle. The air smelled of wet stone and roasted chestnuts. A woman in a navy coat hurried past, her umbrella catching the light. He wanted to tell her to slow down, to notice how beautiful the city looked in the rain, but she was gone before he could open his mouth. He crossed the street slowly, his shoes splashing through shallow puddles. A familiar sound reached him, an old man playing the saxophone beneath the awning of a newsstand. The tune was smooth, lazy, almost tender. Arnold paused, letting the melody wrap around him like an old coat. It reminded him of evenings spent near the Hudson, listening to street musicians after work, the sky burning orange above the river. He stood there longer than he intended. The saxophonist nodded politely, and Arnold nodded back. "Good morning," Arnold said. "Morning, sir," the man replied. "Rain's a friend today." Arnold smiled. It always was. The music carried him forward. Across the park, office clerks hurried under umbrellas, newspapers tucked under their arms. A dog shook itself dry near a bench, sending droplets everywhere. A young couple laughed, running hand in hand through the rain. For a moment, Arnold felt like a ghost drifting through the living. He wasn't sad, just aware, deeply aware, that he had been part of this dance once. He found a dry bench beneath an elm and sat down. His suitcase rested beside him, the leather darkened by years and rain. He took off his hat and wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. The rain softened, turning into a fine mist. He watched the city blur slightly, as if memory itself were painting the scene. A pigeon landed near his shoe, tilting its head as if to study him. Arnold chuckled quietly. "Still here, are you?" he murmured. The pigeon cooed in reply, unbothered by time or weather. He thought about his daughter Claire. She had written inviting him to stay for a few weeks. "Come before the cold really sets in," she'd said in her letter. "You'll love the autumn colours." He hadn't seen her in almost 2 years. The thought warmed him, even as a drop of rain slid down his collar. Reaching into his coat, he pulled out a small envelope. Her letter folded neatly, edges soft from being handled too often. He read the opening line again, though he already knew it by heart. "I miss you, Dad." The words never lost their power. The city clock struck 9. Somewhere nearby, a door opened, releasing the scent of coffee and toasted bread into the air. The world, it seemed, was inviting him to move again. He rose slowly, tucked the letter back into his pocket, and took one last look at the bench. The pigeon had flown away. He adjusted his hat, picked up his suitcase, and started down the wet street toward Fifth Avenue. The rain gathered in the gutters, whispering against the wheels of passing cars. Steam billowed from a manhole, curling like smoke around his feet. For the first time since arriving, Arnold felt something stir, a small pulse of anticipation. Perhaps it was the city, or perhaps it was the thought of seeing his daughter's smile again. Either way, the feeling was real, warm, and alive. He stopped by a lamppost, its light still faint against the grey morning. The sound of the saxophone had faded. replaced by the soft patter of rain and the distant hum of the city rising to full wakefulness. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing it all in. When he opened them, the gust of wind swept down the street, scattering a few leaves at his feet. One of them, golden and trembling, clung briefly to his shoe before slipping away with the water. He watched it drift, feeling strangely comforted. He was not sure where he would go next, but the city seemed to know, and somewhere ahead, a small green awning promised shelter, the faint aroma of newsprint and coffee waiting beneath. By the time Arnold reached the corner near 42nd Street, the rain had turned steady and deliberate, like a conversation that no one wanted to end. The sky hung low over Manhattan, a curtain of soft grey that blurred the edges of everything it touched. Taxi horns sang in the distance, muffled by the weather. The sidewalks gleamed, and every puddle shimmered like a mirror, trying to remember the sun. He stood beneath a narrow awning, shaking the droplets from his hat. The world outside moved with purpose. Men in dark coats rushing toward office doors, women with bright scarves ducking under umbrellas, newspaper boys balancing papers under their arms like wings. Arnold smiled faintly. There was something comforting about watching people hurry through the rain. It reminded him of how alive the city was, even in its greyest moods. Across the street, a young man in a brown trench coat was trying to light a cigarette. Each time he struck the match, the wind blew it out. Arnold watched, amused, until the stranger noticed and laughed at his own misfortune. For a fleeting second, their eyes met, and both men grinned. The city, even soaked and cold, still found ways to make strangers feel like neighbors. Arnold pulled his coat tighter and stepped out from the awning. The rain greeted him like an old friend, damp but gentle. Drops slid down his collar, and his shoes splashed as he crossed the street. He didn't hurry. He let the rain dictate the pace. Each step felt like a heartbeat, steady, deliberate, alive. He turned toward Madison Avenue, where the street lamps glowed faintly despite the daylight. Water ran down their poles like threads of glass. A newspaper had plastered itself to the curb, its ink bleeding into patterns that looked almost like art. One headline caught his eye: "Market rebounds after turmoil." He chuckled softly. The words never changed, only the dates. The rain intensified, bouncing off car roofs, dancing on puddles. Arnold tilted his umbrella forward, though the wind made it difficult to control. Each gust turned the fabric into a restless sail, but he didn't mind. He liked how the storm gave rhythm to the morning. Every sound, the splash of a wheel, the hiss of steam, the chatter from a doorway, became part of a single city-wide song. He remembered days when this rain would have annoyed him. Back then, it ruined polished shoes, delayed meetings, smudged ledgers. But now, standing here decades later, he saw it differently. The rain wasn't in his way anymore. It was the story itself. Passing a bookstore, he paused to look inside. Behind the fogged glass, rows of novels lined the walls, their spines coloured like a secret code. A young clerk was stacking copies of The Catcher in the Rye beside the counter. The smell of paper drifted through the open door, mingled with the metallic scent of wet pavement. Arnold stepped in for a moment, shaking off his umbrella. The bell above the door gave a bright little ring. The clerk glanced up, smiled politely, and returned to arranging books. The warmth of the room wrapped around him like a blanket. He walked the aisles slowly, fingertips brushing against titles he didn't recognize. So much had changed in literature, in language, in the way people told stories. He realized that while he'd spent a lifetime studying numbers, others had been studying hearts. He picked up a thin book of poems and opened it at random. "Rain remembers what we forget," one line read. He smiled. "Yes, it does," he murmured. The bell chimed again as someone entered. A woman in a tan coat, her hair damp, cheeks pink from the cold. She carried a paper bag of groceries and looked around as if seeking shelter more than literature. Their eyes met briefly, and she offered a small, polite smile. Arnold nodded in return, that quiet acknowledgement of two people sharing the same refuge. When he left the shop, the rain had softened again. It seemed to ebb and flow like breath. He decided to walk without destination, letting the streets choose for him. His suitcase, light now, with only a few clothes, bumped gently against his leg. He passed a row of diners, their neon signs humming even in daylight. Steam fogged the windows, silhouettes moving behind the glass. Waitresses carried trays, coffee cups clinked, and somewhere a jukebox whispered a slow tune. Arnold thought of stepping inside, but decided to keep walking. There was something hypnotic about the rhythm of the rain outside, something he didn't want to interrupt. At the corner of 50th, a gust of wind caught him by surprise. His umbrella flipped inside out with a loud snap. For a moment, he stood there laughing, half at the absurdity, half at the memory it triggered. How many times had this happened to him in this very city? It felt like the rain was teasing him, reminding him of all the mornings he had hurried to catch a cab, grumbling at the sky. He closed the broken umbrella and tucked it under his arm. The rain fell freely now on his hat and shoulders, cool and refreshing. A cab splashed past, spraying a wave of water onto the curb. The cold shock hit his shoes, and he gasped, then laughed aloud. The few pedestrians nearby turned their heads, smiling in quiet solidarity. It was the sort of laugh that could only exist on a rainy day, a laugh born of inconvenience that somehow felt like freedom. He ducked beneath another awning to catch his breath. The scent of roasted peanuts drifted from a nearby cart, and he bought a small paper bag. The vendor, a man with a heavy coat and kind eyes, said, "Rain keeps the city clean, eh?" Arnold nodded, tossing a warm peanut into his mouth. "Clean and honest, nothing hides under rain." The vendor grinned. "That's true, sir. The rain tells on us all." Arnold lingered there, watching the river of people move along the street. He thought of how every face held a private story, 1,000 lives passing by, each with its own reason for being out in the storm. Once he might have felt above them, part of the skyline instead of the crowd. Now he felt part of the street itself. The city didn't belong to him anymore, and that was its beauty. It was alive, indifferent, welcoming all the same. He finished the peanuts, wiped his hands on a napkin, and stepped out again. The drizzle had lightened to a silver mist. The buildings loomed softly through it, like memories half recalled. Somewhere ahead, a cafe window glowed with amber light. Inside, he saw figures bent over newspapers and steaming mugs. The sight drew him in, the promise of warmth irresistible. He crossed the street, careful of slick cobblestones, and paused at the door. A small brass bell hung beside it. He touched it once, gently, letting it ring. The sound was delicate, almost hopeful. As he pushed the door open, a wave of warmth greeted him. Coffee, cinnamon, the faint hum of a jazz tune from a radio in the corner. The noise of the street melted away behind him, Arnold removed his hat, ran a hand through his damp hair, and smiled at the scent of the room. The rain, for the first time that morning, stayed outside, and at a table near the window, someone looked up and waved. The cafe door closed behind Arnold with a soft click, sealing out the sound of rain and traffic. Inside, time seemed slower. The air was thick with warmth and the scent of ground coffee, a faint sweetness of pastries cooling on trays behind the counter. Jazz murmured from a radio perched near the window, a lazy trumpet drifting through static. The world outside might have been grey, but here everything was amber and alive. Arnold placed his hat on the coat rack and took a seat by the window. Drops of rain chased each other down the glass, distorting the view of the street he knew so well. Across the road, a hardware store with the same wooden sign stood where it always had. The letters were more faded now, but the shape of the place hadn't changed. He smiled faintly. Once upon a time, he'd bought a small hammer there to hang a painting in his first apartment. The memory came back, not as an image, but as a feeling, the pride of owning something, however small, in a city that didn't give much away easily. A waitress approached, her steps light and sure. She couldn't have been more than 25, hair tucked beneath a navy kerchief. "Coffee, sir?" she asked, voice gentle but brisk in that New York way. "Yes, please," Arnold said, his accent soft and careful. "Black, no sugar." "Coming right up," she replied, and turned toward the counter. He watched her go, her reflection rippling in the window beside his. She reminded him of another waitress, long ago. Her name had been Lila. She used to work in a diner near Wall Street, where he and his colleagues would grab late-night coffee after market hours. Lila had once told him that people were like trains. Some stopped for a while, others just passed through. He hadn't thought about her in years. Funny how the rain could summon ghosts with such tenderness. The coffee arrived on a small porcelain saucer, steam curling in graceful spirals. He wrapped his hands around the cup and let the warmth seep into his skin. Outside, the rain slowed to a shimmer. The city had softened. For a moment, he imagined the same streets decades earlier, men in fedoras darting across intersections, delivery boys balancing boxes on bicycles, newsstands lit by gas lamps. He could almost hear the clatter of his own shoes back then, rushing to a meeting, his coat sharp, his tie perfectly knotted. Now, he just sat and listened. A doorbell jingled as another customer entered, a middle-aged man in a grey overcoat, shaking droplets from his umbrella. He took the seat next to Arnold, glancing at him with polite acknowledgement, before signalling the waitress. "Rain won't let up," the man said casually, unfolding his newspaper. "Seems to like this city too much," Arnold replied, smiling. "Guess so," the man said, returning the smile before disappearing behind the rustle of paper. Arnold sipped his coffee and gazed through the window. Across the street, he spotted a narrow alleyway between two brick buildings. Once, it had led to the back entrance of his old brokerage office. The sight of it tugged at him. He wondered if the office was still there, or if time had turned it into something else, perhaps a tailor shop, or a quiet gallery where people spoke in whispers. He finished his coffee, left a bill on the table, and stepped back into the street. The rain had become a mist again, soft and forgiving. His shoes tapped against the wet pavement as he crossed to the other side. The alley looked smaller than he remembered, framed by dripping fire escapes and trash cans. He stood there a moment before walking in, tracing the path by instinct. The walls smelled faintly of iron and wet stone. Somewhere above, a window creaked open. releasing a puff of warmth from a kitchen. He could hear the clatter of pans, a woman humming, life continuing as it always did. Halfway down the alley, he stopped. There, just as he remembered, was the back door, now painted blue instead of black. The brass handle was tarnished, but when he touched it, it felt familiar. He smiled, shaking his head at the absurdity of it. "Still here," he whispered. He leaned against the wall, letting the memories spill. Long nights in smoke-filled rooms, the smell of ink and sweat, the laughter of men who believed fortunes could be bent by will alone. He remembered the first time he'd signed his name on a client's contract, the rush of responsibility. Back then, everything felt eternal, but even marble cracks and promises fade. A sound pulled him back to the present, the squeak of a trolley wheel. A boy no older than 10 was pulling a cart filled with newspapers, his raincoat too large for his small frame. He stopped when he saw Arnold. "Mister, you all right?" he asked. Arnold blinked, realizing he must have looked lost. "Yes," he said quickly, "just thinking." The boy grinned. "My ma says thinking too long makes a man late." Arnold chuckled. "Your ma sounds wise." "She is," the boy said proudly, tugging at his cap. "Want a paper? 5 cents. "Sure." Arnold reached into his pocket and handed over a dime. "Keep the change." "Thanks, mister," the boy said, then wheeled off into the drizzle, his voice fading with distance. Arnold unfolded the paper. The ink bled slightly from the damp, but the words were legible. Politics, baseball, stocks. It was all there, the heartbeat of the city. He tucked it under his arm and took one last look at the door. Then, with a deep breath, he turned away. Back on the main street, the rain picked up again, heavier this time, but not cruel. He lifted his collar and kept walking. Each block was a chapter from a book he'd once lived in. There was the diner where he'd celebrated his first big deal, its neon sign still buzzing faintly. There was the jewelry shop where he'd bought Claire's mother her first birthday gift, a silver bracelet she'd worn until the day she left. He paused outside that shop. The display case gleamed with new trinkets, but one piece, a small silver locket, looked almost identical to the one he'd chosen years ago. The sight stirred something deep in his chest. Not pain exactly, but a tender ache of remembrance. He stepped closer to the window, fogging the glass slightly as he whispered, "You'd have liked this one too." The rain blurred his reflection again, and for an instant he saw a younger man standing there beside him. The same suit, the same eyes, only unlined and unafraid. Then the reflection shifted, leaving only him, older but not alone. He turned and began walking toward the corner, where the street opened into a small square. The sound of music reached him, soft saxophone notes carried by the rain. He couldn't see the player yet, but the tune was familiar. It was autumn in New York. He smiled, a little surprised by the coincidence. Arnold followed the sound until he reached the square, where a man stood beneath a shop awning, playing to the empty street. The music was low, tender, meant for no one and everyone. Arnold stopped to listen, his heart quiet, his breathing even. The song spoke of the city, the way he remembered it, restless, forgiving, endlessly new. When the player finished, Arnold dropped a coin into the open case. "Beautiful," he said softly. The musician nodded. "The rain helps," he replied. Arnold smiled, turning back toward the street. The music lingered behind him, fading into the rhythm of rain and wheels. He didn't know where he would go next, only that the city seemed to be leading him somewhere, perhaps toward a memory he hadn't met yet, and just ahead, under the next awning, a familiar scent, fresh ink and paper, called to him from a newsstand glowing in the rain. The rain fell steadier now, a thin silver curtain draped over the city. Beneath the green awning of the newsstand, Arnold found brief shelter. The air smelled of wet ink and damp paper, a scent that tugged at the corners of his memory. Rows of newspapers, magazines, and postcards gleamed under the soft yellow bulb hanging above. Each glossy cover caught the rain's reflection. Faces of movie stars, soldiers and singers, frozen mid-smile. The vendor stood behind the counter, hands tucked into fingerless gloves. His grey hair curled under his cap, and his eyes were sharp but kind. "Morning, sir," he greeted, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Looks like the rain's set in for the day." Arnold nodded, brushing a few drops from his coat.
It seems so. New York never does anything halfway.
The man chuckled. "Ain't that the truth? You looking for a paper?" Arnold's gaze drifted across the titles, the Times, the Tribune, the Herald. He reached for one out of habit, the way he used to each morning before heading into the office. "Yes," he said finally, "the Times, please." The vendor handed it over, the pages still warm from the press. Arnold held it with a sort of reverence, as though he were touching something sacred from his past. He opened it to the business section, eyes scanning the columns of numbers. The symbols and arrows were familiar, yet they felt distant now, like a language he once spoke fluently, but hadn't used in years. "Used to work in the markets?" the vendor asked, noticing his interest. Arnold smiled. "Long time ago. Wall Street, back when men still wore hats, and arguments ended with handshakes." The vendor laughed softly. "You don't say. My old man worked the floor too, just after the war. He said the sound in there was like 1,000 clocks all ticking at once." Arnold nodded slowly. "That's exactly right. A symphony of greed and hope." He folded the paper under his arm and looked at the rows of postcards hanging on the rack beside him. One in particular caught his eye. A painting of the skyline seen from Central Park, the towers rising above the mist. The image glowed under the rain's reflection, the same way he remembered the view from his old office window. He picked it up, studying the brushstrokes. "Beautiful," he murmured. "It's funny, I used to look out at this every day and never really saw it." The vendor tilted his head. "You see it different now." "Yes," Arnold said quietly. "Now I see the space between the buildings. The quiet parts." The vendor smiled, a knowing expression. "That's age for you. Makes you notice the silence." A gust of wind rattled the stand, sending a few loose pages fluttering to the ground. Arnold bent to help, catching one before it hit a puddle. The headline read, "Local hero saves child from river." He smiled faintly at the photo of a young man, drenched and smiling, holding the rescued boy. "Good to know bravery's still fashionable," he said, handing the paper back. The vendor grinned. "City's full of surprises, even on a day like this." Arnold glanced toward the corner, where traffic rolled by in glistening waves of gold and grey. The rain bounced off windshields and umbrellas, creating 1,000 tiny worlds reflected in motion. He realized, standing there, that he had spent most of his youth watching the city through glass. Office windows, cab windows, apartment windows, always observing, rarely pausing to feel it on his skin. Today was different. "Do you still sell those old racing forms?" Arnold asked suddenly. The vendor reached under the counter and pulled out a small stack. Got a few left. You a betting man? Arnold chuckled. Not anymore. Used to read them just for the numbers. The odds had a rhythm to them, like music. The vendor slid one across the counter. Then here on the house. Every man deserves a bit of music. Arnold accepted it with a smile. Thank you. For a while, neither spoke. The rain played percussion on the awning, and cars hissed past like gentle applause. The silence between them felt easy, unforced, the kind that happens between people who understand that conversation doesn't always need words. After a minute, Arnold cleared his throat. You've had this stand a long time. Since 39, the man replied proudly. Used to belong to my brother before he shipped out. I took over when he didn't come back. Arnold's expression softened.
I'm sorry.
Don't be, the man said, straightening a stack of magazines. He loved this corner, said it was the only place where the world came to him. Arnold thought about that, about standing in one place while the whole city moved around you. There was something profound in the idea, something that spoke to him in a way numbers never had. The man looked up. You visiting, or are you one of us old ghosts that never really left? Arnold smiled at the phrasing. A bit of both, I think. My daughter lives uptown. I used to work here, though, years ago. The vendor nodded, then welcome home. Arnold felt a warmth in his chest that wasn't from the coffee earlier. He reached into his coat pocket and took out a few coins, but the vendor waved them off. Rain discount, he said, applies to anyone who remembers the old city. Thank you, Arnold said softly, for the paper and for the company. Anytime, friend. Rain or shine. Arnold turned to go, but something made him pause. A small black and white photograph pinned beside the register caught his attention. It showed a group of men in their 20s, standing proudly in front of the same newsstand. Though newer then, the paint bright, the awning unstained. One of the faces looked familiar. That's you, Arnold said, pointing. The vendor chuckled. Yeah, and that's my brother, right there on the left. Arnold leaned closer. The photo's edges were curled, its surface creased from decades of being touched. It's a good picture, he said. You both look full of the world. Guess we were, the man said. Didn't know how quickly it spins. Arnold nodded slowly. No one ever does. He stepped back out into the rain. The city's sounds rushed around him again. Horns, voices, the rhythmic splash of tires. He tucked the newspaper under his arm, the postcard inside it, and walked without hurry. The vendor's words echoed in his head. The world comes to you. He turned the corner, passing a row of narrow storefronts, a shoemaker, a watch repairer, a tiny stationery shop that smelled of glue and dust, all relics of a slower time. He paused at the window of the stationery shop, noticing a pen displayed on red velvet, a fountain pen with a gold nib, identical to the one he had used to sign his first contract in 1938. The sight stirred him. So many beginnings had looked ordinary at first. A pen, a desk, a handshake. He stared at the pen until a droplet from the awning above slid down the glass, distorting his reflection again. The rain had begun to lighten, but its rhythm remained. It pulsed softly in the gutters, hummed through the air vents, whispered across umbrellas. Arnold inhaled deeply, feeling the scent of wet pavement settle in his chest, like an old song returning. Somewhere down the street, A church bell chimed 10 times. He glanced toward the sound, then adjusted his hat and began to walk in that direction. The rain followed him, quieter now, like an old companion keeping pace. He didn't know exactly why the memory of the newsstand felt so important, but he sensed that the city was leading him somewhere. Every corner, every echo, seemed to open a door in his mind, and as he walked past a small cafe window, glowing with golden light, he noticed a familiar reflection. A man with a folded newspaper and an unhurried stride, heading toward the next story, waiting in the rain. By late morning, the city had softened beneath a steady rhythm of rain. The rush of early hours had faded. Shopkeepers leaned in doorways, and the sound of traffic became a lullaby of wheels and water. Arnold turned a corner onto a quieter street, where the smell of roasted beans and butter drifted from an open doorway. Above it, a small painted sign swayed gently in the drizzle. Lennon's Cafe. Since 1919, he hesitated at the entrance, watching the warm glow spill through the windows. Inside, patrons sat wrapped in quiet conversation, their reflections flickering in the glass. The scene reminded him of 100 such mornings long ago. Coffee meetings, chance encounters, the world condensed into a single cup on a rainy day. He stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming softly. Warmth greeted him first, then the scent of cinnamon and espresso. Coats hung from the rack near the wall, dripping gently onto the wooden floor. A waitress glanced up, nodded, and motioned toward an empty table near the window. Arnold took his seat. The chair creaked faintly, a small, familiar sound. Outside, the rain blurred the edges of the street into watercolor. He placed his hat beside him, smoothing the brim. From here, he could see everything: the steady parade of umbrellas, the silver gleam of puddles, the reflection of passing cars. He felt as if he were sitting at the heart of some great clock, watching its gears turn in slow, graceful rhythm. The waitress arrived with a pot of coffee and a small porcelain cup. "Cold one out there today," she said, pouring. "It's the kind of cold that makes the city honest," Arnold replied with a smile. She grinned. "That's one way to see it." The coffee was dark and rich, the steam clouding his glasses. He took a slow sip, feeling warmth spread through his hands. For a moment, he said nothing. He didn't need to. The quiet hum of the cafe filled the spaces between thoughts. The scratch of a pen from a nearby table, the low hiss of the espresso machine, the soft murmur of rain against the glass. At the next table sat a young man, maybe 30, wearing a brown suit too big for him. Papers and sketches were spread across his table, along with an empty cup and a half-eaten scone. He caught Arnold glancing over and smiled shyly, trying to get a design right. He said, tapping his pencil nervously, "But the lines keep running away from me." Arnold chuckled. Maybe they just don't want to be trapped today. Rain does that to ideas. The man laughed, the tension easing from his shoulders. "C'est plutôt très man." "I used to," Arnold said. "Chased numbers mostly. Charts, markets that never stood still." "Ah," the man said, nodding. "So, you learned to draw with money?" "Not as pretty," Arnold replied, "but just as fragile." They shared a quiet moment, the kind that happens when two strangers realize they've lived near the same truths, only through different doors. The young man returned to his sketching, and Arnold to his thoughts. He stared at his reflection in the window again. Outside, the city continued in endless motion. A taxi pulled to the curb, splashing the gutter. A woman in a red coat stepped out, laughing as she lifted her umbrella. The color was bright against the grey, so vivid it almost hurt his eyes. He followed her figure as she disappeared down the block, her laughter swallowed by rain. For a second, he thought of Claire, her mother, young and radiant, stepping out of a cab one spring morning, just like that. The memory came not as a picture, but as a feeling, that impossible mixture of love and time. The coffee cooled, but he didn't mind. Each sip reminded him of mornings before everything became so hurried, when there was still time to notice the steam curling from a cup, or the way light bent through the rain. On the counter, the cafe's radio buzzed softly before catching a clear station. A smooth voice announced, "And now, Ella Fitzgerald, with Isn't It Romantic?" The first notes trickled through the air like honey. The entire cafe seemed to pause, as though even the rain leaned closer to listen. Arnold closed his eyes. The song carried him backward to a night at the Starlight Ballroom in 1936, when he had danced under golden lamps and cheap champagne. He remembered the press of her hand in his, the smell of her perfume, violets and smoke, and how the world had felt endless then. He had believed, as only the young do, that life would always give him one more evening like that. When the song ended, the spell broke gently. He opened his eyes to see the waitress standing beside him, with the check. "You all right, sir?" "Yes," he said softly, just remembering the price of a ticket to the past. She smiled, unsure of his meaning, but kind enough not to ask. "Refill, please." As she poured, a small group entered the cafe, shaking umbrellas and laughing. Their energy brought the outside world in with them, boots squeaking, rain dripping onto the floor. Arnold caught the sound of typewriters and telephones from the street beyond. The city was fully awake now. When he finished his second cup, he folded a few bills under the saucer and gathered his hat. Before leaving, he looked once more at the rain on the window pane. Every drop carried the city's reflection, tiny, shimmering versions of New York, infinite and alive. Outside, the air had cooled further. He opened his umbrella and stepped back into the drizzle. The cafe's light glowed behind him, steady and golden, a hearth for anyone who needed it. For a moment, he considered returning to sit just a little longer, but something in him urged forward motion, the quiet pull of memory and curiosity intertwined. He walked north, his shoes finding rhythm against the slick pavement. The rain whispered in the trees along the avenue, and his breath made small clouds in the air. Each block revealed a piece of his past. The street where he'd once caught the morning trolley, the corner where he'd seen Claire take her first steps, clutching her mother's hand, the hotel where business trips had blurred into late-night loneliness. He passed a jewelry shop and glanced inside. A gramophone sat in the window, spinning a slow instrumental record. Its sound was faint but clear, threading through the glass and into the street. Arnold paused, letting the melody wash over him. It was the same tune that had played during his first promotion dinner, decades gone, yet perfectly intact in sound. For a moment, he considered stepping inside to ask about the record, but he hesitated, smiling instead. Some things, he thought, were best left to memory, untouched, unbought, unbroken by the present. A sudden gust of wind lifted his umbrella again, flipping it halfway. He laughed, clutching it tight, his hat nearly flying off. The rain seemed to mock him kindly, reminding him that even the city's beauty could be mischievous. He managed to wrestle the umbrella back into place, still smiling. Ahead, the faint glow of another awning called to him a bookstore, narrow and dimly lit, its windows fogged, the letters on the glass hand-painted in curling gold. Harper and Daughters, books and stationery. A small bell hung beside the door, identical to the one at the cafe. Arnold paused outside, catching his reflection once more. Older now, yes, but lighter somehow. The rain traced soft lines down the window, blending his face with the shadows of the books inside. He reached for the handle. The door to the bookshop opened with a soft ring of the bell, and a wave of warm, dry air met Arnold's face. The room smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. Dust motes floated in golden threads of light coming through the high windows. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, and behind the counter, an elderly man in a brown cardigan was arranging a pile of new arrivals. Arnold folded his umbrella carefully and shook a few stray droplets onto the mat. The man behind the counter looked up with a friendly nod. "Rain's not giving us a break today," he said. "It never does when you forget your hat," Arnold replied, smiling. The bookseller chuckled. "That's New York for you. Keeps you humble." Arnold wandered among the shelves, letting his fingertips brush against the spines. The titles range from poetry to history, from thrillers to small faded collections of essays. He found comfort in the quiet rustle of pages and the faint smell of glue and linen. Books had a heartbeat of their own here, slow and steady, untouched by the rush of the city. A sudden sound cracked through the peace, the sharp clap of wind against the door. Arnold turned, just as the front window rattled violently, and the rain outside began to hammer with renewed force. The light dimmed, flickering briefly. The bell above the door jingled again, this time in protest. The bookseller muttered, "Storm's picking up. It'll tear the awning if it keeps on." He moved toward the door, but before he could reach it, another gust burst through as a woman stumbled inside, clutching her coat. Her umbrella had turned completely inside out, its ribs twisted like a broken wing. She laughed breathlessly, shaking the rain from her hair. "Good heavens, I think the wind's decided to chase me." Arnold, who had stepped forward instinctively, offered his hand. "Clear, looks like it won." "Seems so," she said, smiling, as she handed the ruined umbrella to the bookseller. "Can't be saved, I'm afraid." The man took it gingerly, inspecting the damage. "Not unless you've got magic, miss. I left mine at home," she replied with a playful sigh. Arnold couldn't help but laugh. The woman looked about 40, perhaps younger, her eyes bright even in the dim shop. Water dotted her coat, and a few strands of hair clung to her forehead. There was an energy to her, something light and unbothered by the rain. "Let me," Arnold said, taking a handkerchief from his pocket and offering it to her. "Thank you," she said, dabbing at her hands. "You're very kind. I should have known better than to buy an umbrella from a street vendor." "They sell optimism disguised as fabric," Arnold said. "It rarely holds up." The bookseller chuckled from behind the counter. "You'll both be dry soon enough. Coffee pot's on the stove if you like." Arnold and the woman exchanged a glance, the kind strangers share when circumstance makes them temporary companions. "That sounds wonderful," she said. "If you're staying, perhaps we could both warm up." Arnold hesitated for a heartbeat, then nodded. "I'd like that." They sat at the small table near the back, beside a shelf labelled local authors. The bookseller poured 2 cups from a dented kettle and left them alone. Outside, the storm roared against the windows, but inside it was calm, the air filled with the scent of roasted beans and paper. "Do you live nearby?" Arnold asked. The woman shook her head. "Just visiting. My sister lives uptown. I'm usually in Chicago, though I grew up here." "Ah," Arnold said. "Then we're both travelers returning to old streets." Her eyes lit up. "You too?" "Yes, I used to work just a few blocks from here. I left years ago, but somehow the rain brought me back. The rain does that," she said, stirring her coffee slowly. "Makes you remember things you thought you'd forgotten." Arnold studied her face in the soft light. There was something familiar in her ease, in the way she looked out the window between sentences, as if she were listening to the rain's rhythm rather than her own thoughts. He found himself smiling without meaning to. "Do you come to bookshops often?" she asked. "When I need to remember, I still like stories," he replied. She tilted her head, intrigued. "And do you?" "Yes," he said simply, "though sometimes I forget to tell my own." Her smile softened. "That's the trouble with getting older, isn't it? We start to collect stories and stop sharing them." Arnold nodded. "Or we think no one's listening anymore." "Well," she said, lifting her cup, "today you've got one listener." The gesture was simple, but it touched him. They spoke for a while longer about cities, about the strange comfort of rain, about how quickly the world had changed. She told him she worked as a teacher, that she spent her days among children who still thought magic was possible. "They're right, of course," she added. "We just forget how to see it." Outside, the storm began to calm, as if taking a breath. The rain softened from fury to drizzle, and light returned to the window pane. The woman glanced outside and sighed. "Looks like the city forgave us." "Maybe it just ran out of things to say," Arnold replied, smiling. They both stood. She retrieved the twisted umbrella from where the bookseller had left it. "Well," she said, "thank you for the company and the handkerchief. You've made this storm almost worth it." "I'll count that as a good day's work," Arnold said. As they reached the door, the bookseller called out, "You'll both want to step lightly, streets slick as ice." The woman nodded. "Thank you." She pushed open the door and looked back at Arnold. "Perhaps we'll meet again, if the weather allows." "New York's full of coincidences," he said, holding her gaze. "I'd like that." She smiled once more and disappeared into the soft curtain of rain, the broken umbrella tucked under her arm. Arnold stood for a long moment, watching her go. Then he turned back to the bookseller, who was smiling knowingly. "She seemed pleasant," the old man said. "She was," Arnold agreed. "Kindness has a way of finding you in storms." He lingered another few minutes, pretending to browse a shelf, though his thoughts were elsewhere. The rain's rhythm had changed again, no longer wild, but steady and sure. It tapped against the window like a heartbeat, pulling him gently forward. When he finally stepped outside, the air smelled cleaner, brighter. He opened his umbrella, the fabric glistening under the lamplight, and began to walk. The street was slick, the reflections deep. He caught glimpses of the woman's shape far ahead, her tan coat blending with the mist before vanishing around a corner. Arnold smiled to himself. The storm had been a brief interruption, but it had left something lasting, an odd quiet sense that the city wasn't done speaking to him yet. He tightened his grip on the umbrella and turned toward the avenue. Somewhere ahead, faint music drifted from a cafe, soft piano notes mixing with the echo of rain. He followed the sound, his shoes leaving small ripples in the puddles. And as the city exhaled the last of its storm, he realized that every drop, every dust, every small mishap was leading him somewhere he hadn't been in a long time. Back toward the living pulse of things, where the next story was already waiting. The music he'd followed led Arnold to a cafe tucked between a tailor's shop and a florist. The air outside still shimmered with leftover rain, and petals from the florist's display clung to the sidewalk in small, bright constellations. A striped awning sagged under drops that hadn't yet fallen. Behind the glass, people leaned close over steaming cups, their movements slow and soft, as if the whole city had agreed to take a breath. Arnold entered. The bell chimed, releasing a wave of warmth and quiet conversation. A young waitress with a pencil tucked behind her ear greeted him with a nod and pointed to a small table near the back. Only one chair was occupied. A woman sat there with an open notebook, her pen moving steadily across the page. She looked up as he approached, offering a polite smile. "Would you mind sharing?" he asked. "Seems every other seat's taken." "Of course not," she said, sliding her bag to the side. Writers shouldn't claim more space than necessary. Arnold chuckled and hung his coat on the chair before sitting. The table was narrow. Their cups would almost touch. Outside, the rain began again. Not a storm, but a soft return, like memory repeating itself. A waiter arrived with a tray. "What'll it be, sir?" "Just coffee," Arnold replied. "Black." "And for you, miss?" "Tea, please. The strongest you've got." They shared a small laugh as the waiter departed. Arnold glanced at the notebook. The handwriting was elegant, but hurried, looping letters that seemed to chase each other across the page. "You're a writer then?" he said. "Trying to be," she replied. "Letters mostly, for soldiers abroad. That's noble work." She shrugged. "It's quieter than most kinds of courage." Her voice had a steady warmth to it, the kind that made simple sentences feel like confidences. Arnold leaned slightly forward. "Do you write to people you know?" "Sometimes. Sometimes to names I'll never meet again." He nodded, thoughtful. "Words are a kind of bridge, aren't they, between strangers?" She smiled faintly. "And what about you, sir? What brings you to bridges on a rainy day?" Arnold hesitated, watching the steam curl from his cup. "I'm visiting my daughter," he said at last. "But mostly, I think I came to see if the city still remembers me." "The city always remembers," she said gently. "It just waits for us to notice." They drank quietly for a while, the sound of rain filling the silence between them. Her notebook lay open, the ink shining faintly in the light. Arnold's gaze caught on one sentence near the top of the page. "Letters are the proof that someone thought of you when you weren't there." He read the line aloud, without meaning to. "That's beautiful," he said. She blushed slightly. "Thank you. It's for my brother. He's stationed in France. I hope he comes home soon." "So do I," she said softly, tracing the rim of her cup. "Writing helps me believe it." Arnold smiled. "In my day, we believed in numbers more than words. I spent my life chasing them, figures, margins, balance sheets. But lately, I think I missed something more important." "And what's that?" she asked. "The space between the numbers, the stories they hide." The woman's eyes softened, her curiosity quiet but deep. "You sound like someone who's lived through a few chapters worth reading." "Maybe," he said, chuckling. "But some pages got damp and stuck together." She laughed, a sound bright enough to lift the air around them. The cafe's radio hummed a slow melody, and a waiter passed, carrying a tray of pastries, their sugar catching the light. Arnold ordered 2 without thinking. When they arrived, the woman smiled in surprise. "You shouldn't have. It's raining," he said. "The world deserves something sweet." They shared the pastries, almond croissants, still warm from the oven, crumbs scattered between their cups, small golden islands on the dark table. Each bite seemed to slow time further. Between conversation, Arnold watched her write a few more lines in her notebook. Her handwriting danced like rain. "You make it look easy," he said. "It isn't," she replied, smiling. "But when it works, it feels like breathing." He nodded. "That's how the market used to feel to me once, before it turned into noise." For a moment, neither spoke. The rain pressed against the windows like a quiet drumbeat. Outside, a man hurried past, carrying flowers wrapped in brown paper, their color vivid against the gray. Arnold followed him with his eyes until he disappeared. The woman closed her notebook and set her pen down. "Do you know what I like about rainy days?" she asked. "What's that?" "They make strangers sit closer." Arnold smiled at that, the kind of smile that begins small and stays. Maybe that's the city's secret. It needs rain to remember kindness. Or maybe, she said, people do. Her tea had gone cold, but she didn't seem to mind. She rested her chin on her hand and looked out the window. "My brother used to say the sound of rain on glass is the safest sound in the world. I never really understood that until now." Arnold nodded slowly. "It's the sound of being inside, alive and dry, of having made it home." The clock above the counter chimed noon, its sound echoing through the small cafe. The other patrons stirred, finishing their meals, shaking off the morning. Arnold realized he'd been there longer than he'd planned. "I should go," she said softly, gathering her papers. "The post office closes early on Saturdays." "Of course," Arnold said, standing as she did. "Thank you for the company, and for the coffee," she added, smiling. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small coin, and placed it on the table. "For good fortune," he said. She looked at it curiously. "A silver dollar? From 1929, he said. "It's seen better days, but it's lucky or stubborn. I'm not sure which." She hesitated, then tucked it into her notebook. "I'll keep it safe. Maybe it'll bring my brother home." "I hope it does," Arnold said sincerely. They shook hands. Her palm was cool but steady, her grip certain. "Take care, Mr. Arnold," he said. "Just Arnold." She nodded. "I'm Margaret. Goodbye, Arnold." "Goodbye, Margaret." She left with her coat buttoned high, and her notebook pressed to her chest. Through the window, he watched her umbrella bloom in the rain, this one whole and unbroken. The street swallowed her figure slowly until she became part of the city's rhythm again. Arnold sat back down, finishing the last sip of his coffee. The croissant crumbs were gone, and in their place was the faint scent of almonds and ink. He looked out the window one last time. The rain had softened to a shimmer, blurring the people into moving watercolor. He touched the empty chair across from him and smiled faintly. "Rain makes strangers sit closer," he repeated to himself. Then he rose, put on his hat, and stepped into the damp afternoon. The street was shining again, reflecting light in every puddle. Somewhere to the south, a familiar district waited. the one where he'd once spent his best and worst hours. He began walking toward Wall Street, each step echoing softly through the rain. The air carried the metallic scent of the harbor and something else, anticipation. The city, he felt, still had lessons left for him, and as he turned the corner, the wind shifted, blowing a page from Margaret's notebook across the wet pavement. He bent to pick it up, but before he could, the rain caught it and carried it away down the gutter, as if the story had decided to continue without him. The rain had quieted into a mist by the time Arnold reached the financial district. The tall buildings rose like monuments to ambition, their glass and stone surfaces reflecting the grey light of the sky. Water trickled through gutters and down drain pipes, murmuring like an old hymn. Arnold slowed his pace as the familiar grid of streets unfolded before him. The narrow corridors, the echo of footsteps against walls, the faint metallic scent that always seemed to linger here. He passed under the shadow of a grand facade he had once known intimately. The brass plaque beside the door still read Henderson and More Investments. The letters were tarnished, but they stood firm, as if time had hesitated to touch them. Arnold stopped for a long moment, gazing at the entrance that had once felt like the threshold to everything. He remembered the rush of mornings here, how he'd arrive with coffee in one hand and confidence in the other. He'd known every name that mattered, every number that promised a future. He had been part of the rhythm that made this city beat. Now it was quieter. The storm had chased most people indoors, leaving the sidewalks nearly empty. A janitor swept water toward the curb. Somewhere above, a window slammed shut against the drizzle. Arnold stepped closer to the door. His reflection looked back from the brass, older, slower, softer, but undeniably the same man. For a moment, he could almost hear the echo of his younger self's laughter coming from within. He smiled faintly, then turned away. A few blocks down, he found a small park wedged between two tall buildings. It wasn't there in his time, but the space felt right. A pocket of peace in a district that had once known only noise. He sat on a wet bench, the smell of rain on stone filling the air. Reaching into his coat, he took out the newspaper he'd bought earlier at the newsstand. It was damp now, the corners curling. Between the pages, the postcard he'd picked out had slipped loose. He turned it over, noticing that it was blank. He borrowed a pen from his breast pocket, the same one he had used for decades, its gold nib slightly dulled, and began to write. "Dear Claire," he wrote, the letters slow and deliberate. "New York feels smaller and larger all at once. I've walked streets that remember me and others that don't. The rain makes everything softer. I think you would have liked it today. The sound, the calm, the way it forces people to look up from themselves. It reminds me of you in some way. You always had a way of noticing things others missed." He paused. The page blurred for a second as a drop of water landed near his signature, not from the sky, but from the brim of his hat. He smiled and kept writing. "I met a woman today who writes letters for soldiers. She reminded me that words can be bridges. Maybe this city is one too, a bridge between who I was and who I still might be." He stopped again, tapping the pen against the card. The thought felt both true and unfinished. From somewhere nearby, a pigeon cooed softly, shaking rain from its wings. The world had gone still, except for that small sound. Arnold leaned back, letting the paper rest on his knee. The mist clung to his coat. turning its wool a deeper shade of grey. The air was cool, but not cold. It smelled faintly of river water and distant smoke. He closed his eyes and for a moment let himself drift. He saw his old office, the tick of the clock, the chatter of typewriters, the faint rattle of coins. He saw himself at his desk, pen in hand, signing names he barely remembered now. He saw laughter and ambition and late-night deals that had seemed immortal, but then the image shifted. He saw Claire as a child, sitting cross-legged on the floor, building small towers of wooden blocks. "They'll fall," he had told her. "I'll build them again," she'd said, smiling. When he opened his eyes, the rain had stopped entirely. The city was wrapped in a pale silver haze. He finished the postcard with a final line. "You were right about New York. It's still alive. It always will be. I'll see you tonight, my dear." He signed simply, "Love, Dad," and slipped the card back into the newspaper. A few minutes later, a sound broke the quiet. A streetcar bell, faint but clear. Arnold looked up, spotting it gliding along the rails at the corner. He stood brushing droplets from his sleeve and walked toward it. As he waited for the light to change, he noticed a man leaning against a lamppost, holding a small stack of envelopes under his coat to protect them from the damp. He was young, early 20s perhaps, and his uniform marked him as a postal courier. The boy nodded respectfully as Arnold approached. "Busy day for letters?" Arnold asked. "Always," the boy said, smiling. "Rain slows people down, gives them time to write." Arnold held up his postcard. "Then maybe you can help me deliver this." The boy took it carefully, tucking it into his bag. "I'll see that it gets where it's going." Arnold nodded, slipping a coin into the boy's gloved hand. "Thank you." The courier tipped his cap and stepped onto the trolley, disappearing down the street. Arnold watched until the red light on the back of the car faded from sight. Then he turned and began walking again, his pace unhurried. The rain had left the streets shining like polished marble. Windows reflected pale streaks of sky, and the sound of dripping water echoed softly between the buildings. As he passed one alley, he caught the smell of coffee again, the same scent that had followed him all morning. He smiled. The city was full of repetitions, he thought, echoes and refrains. Maybe that was its language. He found another cafe, smaller than the last, with only a few tables visible through the glass. He entered, ordered tea this time, and sat by the window. The waitress brought his cup and left him alone. The tea was hot and fragrant, tasting faintly of citrus. He pulled a napkin toward him and began sketching a few lines. Nothing precise, just the outline of rooftops, a lamppost, a figure with an umbrella. He wasn't an artist, but he liked the motion of it, the way his hand seemed to remember how to create, rather than calculate. As he worked, a thought drifted through his mind, like the mist outside. Every story I ever told myself about success was missing a human face. The idea lingered. He leaned back in his chair, watching a pair of children press their noses against the window from outside, laughing at their own reflections. Behind them, the city stretched endlessly, wet, alive, forgiving. Arnold smiled, folding the napkin with care. He tucked it into his coat pocket, next to his pen. The rain might return, but for now, the air felt new again, washed clean. He rose from the table, paid his bill, and stepped back into the street. The puddles were beginning to dry, leaving faint mirrored traces of clouds. A single drop fell from a sign above, landing on his cheek. He looked up to see a patch of pale sunlight pushing through the grey. Arnold tipped his hat to it. "You took your time," he said softly, and as he walked toward Wall Street once more, the clouds parted just enough for the city to gleam like an old dream waking up, patient and whole. By early afternoon, sunlight began to break timidly through the thinning clouds. It didn't dazzle, it glowed softly, tinting the rainwater on the streets to gold. The air had that peculiar clarity that only follows a long storm. Cool, metallic, new. Arnold turned onto Broad Street, drawn forward by memory more than direction. The familiar canyon of tall buildings rose around him, their windows gleaming like damp mirrors. Here, decades ago, he had lived another life. This was his kingdom once. Marble steps, the echo of polished shoes, the click of briefcases opening. He slowed near the corner where the stock exchange loomed, the flags outside heavy with rain. In his youth, this corner had pulsed like a living thing, every shout from the trading floor reverberating through the stone, every rumor spreading faster than the wind. Now it was quiet. The wet cobblestones glistened, and only a few clerks hurried past under umbrellas, their reflections slipping over puddles. The city's noise seemed to hold its breath here. Arnold stood under the archway of an old building, hands in his pockets, and looked up at the facade where his first office had been. The carved letters were still there, faint but legible. Carter and Hale, brokers. He smiled wryly. "Still standing," he murmured, "stronger than some of us." The entrance was locked, but through the glass he could glimpse a different world. Sleek desks, electric lamps, telephones where once there had been chalkboards and ticker tape. A new generation now lived in those rooms, chasing a rhythm he had once known by heart. He remembered his first day here, young and starched, a pocket full of borrowed courage. He'd worn a grey suit that cost a month's wages and carried a pen he couldn't afford to lose. His boss, Mr. Hale, had told him, "Markets don't reward hesitation, son. Blink and you miss your fortune." Arnold had believed him. For years he'd measured life by opportunity, by how much he gained and how little he lost. A voice startled him from his reverie. "Excuse me, sir. Looking for someone?" He turned to see a young man in suspenders standing under the doorway next to him, a stack of papers tucked beneath one arm. "No," Arnold said, smiling. "Just revisiting an old battlefield." The young man laughed politely. "You used to work here." "Long ago, back when trades came in on paper, not through machines." "That must have been something," the boy said, eyes bright. "They say it was chaos." "It was," Arnold said, with a soft chuckle. "The good kind, the kind that made you feel alive." The young man hesitated, then asked, "Did you make it big?" Arnold paused before answering. "Big enough to learn that numbers don't keep you warm at night." The boy smiled uncertainly, unsure if it was advice or regret. "Well," he said, shifting his papers, "they're hiring again, if you ever miss the noise." "Thank you," Arnold said, tipping his hat, "but I think I prefer the silence now." When the boy left, Arnold lingered, gazing once more at the door, the reflection staring back at him. It wasn't the confident man who had once sprinted through these streets. It was someone gentler, quieter, perhaps wiser. He walked a few steps farther, to the small square at the intersection, where once He and his colleagues had gathered to smoke cigars and boast about impossible futures. The benches were slick with rain now, but one still stood under the same iron lamppost. Arnold sat. The city pulsed around him again, distant but constant. The hum of trolleys, the murmur of conversation, the occasional shout of a vendor selling roasted peanuts at the corner. The sound carried him backward to the autumn of 1929, when the air here had felt just like this. He remembered the morning the crash began. He had stood not far from this very spot, watching men run from the exchange, their faces pale, their hats slipping from their heads. The papers in their hands had looked like birds, fluttering and falling through the air. The noise had been unbearable, phones ringing, shouts, panic swelling like a wave. He could still hear it now, if he closed his eyes. The sound of everything that once felt permanent cracking open. That week had changed him. It had taught him how fragile certainty was, how easily success could vanish like steam on glass. He remembered the walk home that night, the rain falling harder than it did today, the city dim and trembling, and a single thought repeating in his mind. What will I tell her? Claire's mother had waited up with a lamp burning low, her eyes tired but kind. She hadn't asked about the money. She'd asked if he was all right. He hadn't known what to say then. Arnold rubbed his hands together, bringing himself back to the present. The rain that had returned was light, steady, and forgiving. It washed over the memories without erasing them, polishing the edges instead. A man selling newspapers approached, his cart squeaking. "Afternoon edition, sir," he called. Arnold smiled. Why not? The world keeps turning. He bought one and unfolded it carefully. Headlines about elections, about the markets rising again, about people still chasing what they always had. He folded it neatly beside him and looked up. Across the street, a clock struck 2. Its bell echoed down the narrow lanes, a clear, steady sound cutting through the drizzle. Time, Arnold thought, was the only market that never crashed. A woman hurried past, her umbrella a bright blue against the grey stone. Something about the colour made him think of Margaret, the letter writer. He wondered if she had already posted her letters, if she was sitting somewhere now, with her tea gone cold, thinking about strangers like him. He smiled to himself. Perhaps the city did remember after all. Not in faces or names, but in small echoes like these. The wind shifted, carrying the faintest trace of music, a violin, perhaps from somewhere near the exchange steps. Arnold followed the sound until he saw a young musician standing beneath an awning, bow gliding across the strings. The melody was soft and melancholy, the kind that fills the space between raindrops. Arnold approached, standing just far enough not to intrude. When the song ended, he placed a coin in the open case. "Beautiful piece," he said. "Thank you, sir," the musician replied, eyes bright beneath his cap. "It's called The Rise and Fall. Wrote it myself." Arnold smiled. A fitting name for this corner. The boy nodded, unsure of the weight behind the words. Arnold turned to leave, his shoes splashing lightly in the puddles. The rain had thinned to a mist again, leaving trails of silver along the gutters. As he walked, he passed the alley that led back toward his old office. He hesitated, then kept going. Some doors, he thought, were better left closed, not out of sorrow, but because they'd already said what they needed to. When he reached the end of the street, The sun finally broke through fully, striking the wet pavement with a sudden brilliance. The whole district shimmered, gold and grey at once, as if the city were made new again. Arnold paused to take it in. The buildings glowed like polished brass, their reflections rippling across the puddles. For the first time all day, he felt warmth on his face. He turned north, away from the exchange. Walking slowly through the clearing light, the sound of the violin lingered behind him, fading with each step until it was only a memory. And just ahead, beyond the shimmer of rain-soaked streets, a small red awning caught his eye. Beneath it, the sign of a modest barber shop he once knew still hung, its lettering faded but legible, Murray's Shave and Cut. He smiled. The same place where he'd gone before job interviews. Where the barber used to say, "Confidence starts with a clean collar." Arnold chuckled quietly and adjusted his own. Perhaps he thought, confidence also starts with remembering where you came from. He stepped toward the awning, the last drops of rain falling lightly around him like applause. The bell above the barber shop door gave a soft metallic ring as Arnold entered. The familiar scent met him instantly. Tonic, shaving cream, and the faint sweetness of soap on warm towels. Time seemed to move slower here. The mirrors along the wall reflected the golden haze of late afternoon light filtering through the rain-streaked windows. The rhythmic snip of scissors and the low murmur of voices filled the air like a gentle metronome. Behind the counter stood a man in his 30s, with slicked hair and a pressed white smock. He looked up as Arnold approached. "Afternoon, sir. Weather finally giving us a break." "Seems it," Arnold said, closing his umbrella, "though I wouldn't bet on it." The barber chuckled. "New York keeps its promises, like a poker player." Arnold smiled faintly. The chair nearest the window was empty, the same one he used to sit in when he was a young broker, all shine and certainty. "I'd like a trim, if you have the time." "For you, I've always got time," the barber replied, gesturing toward the seat. Arnold settled in, the leather creaking softly beneath him. The barber draped a fresh white cloth around his shoulders, the fabric cool against his neck. Outside, the city glistened, the last drops of rain sliding lazily down the glass. He could see his reflection faintly in the mirror, half shadowed by the fading light. The barber began to work with easy precision. "Been a while since you were in." Arnold smiled at his reflection. "More than a while. Used to come here when old Mr. Murray ran the place." The barber paused mid-snip, eyes widening.
"You knew Murray?"
"Knew him well," Arnold said. "He gave me a haircut the day before the crash." The barber's hand slowed slightly. "The crash, you mean?" "Yes, 1929. Arnold's voice was calm, almost tender. "This very week, if I remember right. I came in for a trim before heading to the exchange. Thought a sharp appearance might help my luck." The scissors paused again, their sound replaced by the faint hiss of the radiator. Arnold's eyes drifted to the window, where the city outside blurred into moving reflections. "Funny thing about that week," he said softly. "The weather was just like this. Grey skies, drizzle that never stopped. Everyone said rain was good luck. It wasn't." The barber leaned against the chair, listening. "You were working down there?" "Right at the heart of it," Arnold said. "Carter and Hale, 3rd floor. We thought the world was endless back then. Money moved like wind. You couldn't see it, but you could feel it. Every day was a race, and the finish line kept moving." He could see it clearly now. The fevered pace, the tickers spitting numbers, the shouts bouncing off marble. That morning, I remember the noise. It wasn't panic at first, it was disbelief. Phones ringing off the hook, men shouting across desks, some laughing like they didn't believe what they were seeing. I told myself it would turn around. It always had before. The barber nodded quietly. The scissors resumed their rhythm, soft and steady. Arnold continued, his voice gentler now, like he was telling a story to the rain. I knew it was chaos. Men running outside, waving papers like flags. Some cried, others bought more, convinced fortune would smile again by dusk. I remember standing at the window, watching the sky grow darker, thinking I'd just wait it out. He paused, the smell of shaving cream, thick in the air. It didn't pass. The numbers fell and kept falling. We lost everything we thought we owned in a day. Silence settled between them. The sound of the scissors stopped. The barber rested his hand on the chair, unsure if he should speak. Finally, Arnold smiled faintly in the mirror. I suppose that was the day I learned what not to chase. The barber relaxed, returning to his work. You made it through, though. Yes, Arnold said, because of her. Your wife? He nodded. She met me at the door that night. The power was out. City dark, rain pouring through the alley gutters. I expected anger, disappointment. Instead, she handed me a towel for my hair and said, "We'll start again tomorrow. That's all. No blame, just that." He chuckled softly. I told her she should have been a broker. She knew the real market better than I did, the one made of patience. The barber smiled at that. Sounds like she was smart. She was, Arnold said, and brave. Two things rarer than gold back then. The scissors made their soft rhythm again, steady as rain. Arnold watched the small curls of grey hair fall onto the white cloth. They looked almost silver in the late light. You still think about it much? The barber asked after a pause. The crash. Arnold shook his head. Not so much the fall, more what came after. The quiet days when we had to learn to live differently. I started reading more then, books I'd never had time for. Walked the streets, watched the city rebuild itself. That's when I learned New York's secret. The barber raised an eyebrow in the mirror. And what's that? That no matter how hard it rains, the city dries. Always. They both smiled. Outside, the clouds were parting again. Thin stripes of blue breaking through the grey. Arnold closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound of scissors fade into the hum of the radiator and the distant voices outside. He could almost hear her voice again, soft, patient, timeless. When the barber finished, he dusted Arnold's collar with talcum powder and folded away the cloth. "There we go," he said. "Looks sharp." Arnold stood, smoothing his coat. "You've got your grandfather's hand," he said, looking around the shop. Murray used to say a good haircut should make a man walk straighter. I think he was right. The barber laughed. He always said that, even to me. I used to sweep his floors. Arnold's eyes softened. "And you're keeping the right tradition alive." He paid and tipped generously. As he turned to leave, the barber called out, "Hey, mister." "Arnold," he said. "Arnold," the barber repeated. "You ever miss it? The chase?" Arnold considered the question, his hand on the door. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but only the mornings. The evenings, I'm glad they're quiet now." The barber nodded, understanding. Outside, the street glowed under the hesitant sun. Arnold placed his hat on his head and stepped out, the wind carrying the scent of wet stone and cologne. The buildings gleamed, new and old at once. He walked toward the intersection, his reflection following him in the windows. A little neater now, a little lighter. At the corner, he paused. Across the street stood a record shop with a sign that read Melody Lane, new releases and old souls. Through the glass, he glimpsed a row of vinyl covers, one of them familiar, a jazz album he'd once played on Sunday mornings when Claire was a child. The song title beneath the name caught his eye. Autumn Comes Again. He smiled softly, the air bright with possibility. The bell from the shop door jingled as a customer exited, and the faint sound of a trumpet drifted into the street, warm and wistful. Arnold turned toward the music, letting the door close behind him as the afternoon sunlight painted the wet pavement gold once more. The trumpet's echo followed Arnold as he crossed the narrow street, the last of the rain dripping from the awnings. Melody Lane stood at the corner, its windows fogged with warmth and sound. The faint hum of jazz spilled out each time the door opened, blending with the smell of vinyl and rain-wet stone. Arnold paused under the striped awning before entering. The wind still carried a chill, and he slipped a cigarette from his coat pocket, a habit he rarely indulged in anymore. He cupped his hands, shielding the match from the breeze, the small flame flickering against the grey of the street. The first draw tasted sharp, earthy, a little bitter. He hadn't smoked since before Claire's wedding. He leaned against the brick wall, letting the music drift over him. Inside, a trumpet meandered through an old melody, lazy and patient, like the city catching its breath after the storm. People hurried past on the sidewalk, collars turned up, umbrellas tucked under their arms, eyes fixed ahead. The rain had passed, but the air still hummed with its aftertaste. For the first time all day, Arnold didn't feel like a visitor. He felt like part of the rhythm again. The lingering smoke, the rain-dark bricks, the jazz curling through the door. A voice broke through the quiet behind him. "You're blocking my sunshine, mister." Arnold turned. A man stood half in the doorway, half out. A stranger with a kind of easy disarray. His coat was wrinkled, his hat too big, and a saxophone case leaned against his leg. His grin was lopsided, his voice smooth and teasing. Arnold smiled faintly. Didn't realize there was any sunshine to block. The man laughed. There's always a little, even in New York. He pulled out his own cigarette and gestured with it. Got a light? Arnold held out his matchbook. Sure, Storm didn't take that from me. The saxophonist leaned in, lighting up. The first inhale drew a slow exhale of smoke that curled into the air like ghostly music. Thanks, he said. Name's Sam. Arnold. Nice to meet you, Arnold. You a music man? Not professionally, Arnold said, but I've spent half a lifetime listening. Sam chuckled. That counts. Sometimes the listeners hear more than we do. They both leaned against the wall, under the awning, the drizzle finally giving way to light. Across the street, the reflection of a taxi's headlights painted streaks on the wet pavement. For a while, neither spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It carried the ease of two strangers sharing shelter, smoke, and time. Arnold took another drag, then glanced at the case beside Sam. You play in there? Every night since '46, Sam said. They keep me around, 'cause I know when not to play. You ever notice that about jazz? It's not the notes that matter, it's the space between them. Arnold smiled. recognizing the truth. That's life too. Sam raised an eyebrow. You a philosopher or a banker? Once a banker, Arnold said, with a small laugh. Now just an observer. Sam grinned. Same job, different paycheck. They both laughed softly, the city murmuring around them. A breeze swept through, carrying the faint aroma of coffee from a cafe down the street. Sam's smoke curled toward the sky. "Bore you from here?" Arnold asked. Sam nodded. "Born in Harlem. My old man fixed elevators. Said he liked helping people go up and down safely. I told him I wanted to play music instead. He said, as long as you don't fall." "Wise man," Arnold said. "Yeah," Sam replied. He listened to Duke every night. Said there was truth in those horns. The name pulled a faint smile from Arnold. "Duke Ellington," he said. "I used to hear him at the Savoy." His sound could turn a whole room gold. Sam's eyes widened. "You saw him live?" "Once," Arnold said. 1941, maybe. I remember the lights, soft, warm, moving with the rhythm. My wife was with me. She said the world looked like honey that night. Sam exhaled a low whistle. "Man, that's the thing about jazz. It makes memory sound better than it probably was." Arnold chuckled. "Maybe, but it's a nice trick." They smoked in silence for a while longer. A couple passed by, laughing quietly, their hands brushing. The street had taken on that mid-afternoon calm, where everything slows but nothing truly stops. Sam nodded toward the record shop. "You going in?" "Thinking about it," Arnold said. "They've got an old Ellington record in there. Solitude, I think. Mint condition, it's a good day for that one." Arnold looked toward the window. Inside, a clerk flipped through a stack of vinyls, while another customer listened to a sample on headphones. "You play there too?" "Sometimes," Sam said. "Not officially. They let me set up near the door on weekends, help sell records." Arnold smiled. "Must be nice, living with music all day." Sam shrugged. "It's company. Some days, that's all a man needs." Arnold nodded slowly. "I used to think success was company. And now?" Sam asked. "Now I think company is success." Sam laughed softly. "You should write that down. Might sell a few records." Arnold flicked the ash from his cigarette and looked out over the street. The sun had finally broken through, its light glinting off puddles and window glass. "You know," he said, "this city never changes as much as it pretends to." Sam tilted his head. "You mean it stays the same?" "No," Arnold said. "It stays alive. That's better." Sam nodded approvingly. "I'll drink to that once I've got a drink." He picked up his saxophone case, slinging it over his shoulder. "You coming in? I'm about to play a set. Might even do Solitude for old time's sake." Arnold smiled, dropping the stub of his cigarette into a small puddle. "I wouldn't miss it." They stepped into Melody Lane together, the bell above the door chiming softly. The shop was cozy, filled with the earthy scent of wood and records. Rows of vinyl stretched across the walls, each sleeve a story waiting to spin. Sam nodded to the clerk, then opened his case. The shop fell quiet as he assembled the saxophone, its brass body gleaming in the filtered light. Arnold found a chair near the window, his coat draped over one arm, and waited. When Sam began to play, the first notes were low and mournful, a slow unfolding of memory and breath. The sound filled the small space like fog, curling through corners, finding its way into every heart that listened. Arnold felt it settle deep inside him, stirring something both old and whole. It wasn't the song that mattered, it was the feeling behind it. The pauses, the hesitations, the way Sam's hands lingered before each note. Arnold thought of the city's rhythm, the rise and fall, the noise and the silence, all of it weaving into one long melody. When the song ended, the small audience clapped softly. Sam smiled and nodded toward Arnold. For the gentleman who saw Duke when the world still danced. Arnold raised his hand slightly, humbled and grateful. Thank you. Sam grinned. Thank the rain, friend. It brings good company. Arnold stepped out again a few minutes later, the air lighter now, the city gleaming like a photograph, catching light at just the right angle. He turned north toward the avenue, each footstep steady. The day was far from over, and the sky had begun to open into pale blue. Somewhere ahead, the scent of evening bread drifted through the air, warm and familiar, and as he walked, Arnold realized that the quiet conversation under the awning, the smoke, the laughter, the jazz, had left something behind. Not a memory, but a small flame still burning inside him, steady against the wind. By the time Arnold left Melody Lane, the afternoon had unfolded into a silver calm. The rain had stopped entirely, leaving the streets gleaming like mirrors. Puddles pooled between cobblestones, reflecting the fractured blue of the late sky and the steady glow of street lamps beginning to flicker awake. He stood at the curb for a moment, breathing in the scent of the city after rain, wet asphalt, faint tobacco, the distant trace of roasted nuts from a vendor setting up again after the storm. The sound of engines rolled through the air, taxis honking, gears shifting, the rhythmic hiss of tires slicing through shallow puddles. The streets were alive again. New York, washed clean, was starting over for the second time that day. Arnold raised his hand, and a cab slid to a stop beside him. The driver leaned out, a man with dark hair, a fedora pushed back on his head, and a grin that looked half amused, half weary. "Where to, mister?" Arnold hesitated. He didn't want to go anywhere in particular. "Just drive uptown," he said finally. Slowly, the driver shrugged. "Sure thing, the meter likes that." Arnold chuckled, climbed in, and settled into the back seat. The vinyl seat creaked under his weight, still damp from passengers before him. The cab pulled away from the curb, merging into the post-rain rhythm of the city. Outside, reflections flowed past the window, store signs, lamplight, the blur of pedestrians stepping gingerly over puddles. The taxi's wipers swayed like a slow metronome. Arnold rested his hand on the sill, feeling the faint vibration of the engine through the metal. He'd spent years inside cars like this, rushing from meeting to meeting, never noticing the view. Now, without a destination, the motion felt almost meditative. Every red light was a pause to breathe. Every corner turn, a small act of renewal. They passed a florist whose window was fogged with humidity. Bouquets of autumn chrysanthemums filled the glass in muted oranges and browns. Arnold remembered buying flowers there once, long ago, for his wife's birthday. The clerk had wrapped them in brown paper, tying them with a ribbon that had come undone by the time he'd reached home. She'd laughed, said, "The ribbon's not important. The thought's what ties it all together." He smiled at the memory and touched the brim of his hat. The cab turned north onto Broadway. Traffic was thick now, but no one seemed impatient. The rain had softened the edges of everything. Taxis lined up like bright yellow beads, their lights reflecting in the wet pavement. Pedestrians crossed in clusters, laughter mixing with the hum of engines. It was a city returning to itself, loud, alive, unashamed. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror. "You look like a man, remembering something good." "Maybe I am," Arnold said. "That's the best kind of remembering," the driver replied. "Most folks in my back seat remember bills." Arnold laughed softly. "Once I did too." The driver snorted. "Don't we all? So what brings you back to New York, mister?" "My daughter," Arnold said. "And the rain, I suppose?" The driver raised an eyebrow. "Rain." Arnold nodded. "It changes the way a city sounds, makes it honest again." "That's poetic," the driver said. "You a writer?" Arnold smiled. "No, just someone who's finally learned to listen." The driver grinned, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel as the cab idled at a red light. From the next car over, a faint tune leaked out. Ella Fitzgerald again, her voice wrapping around the afternoon like velvet. Arnold closed his eyes for a moment, letting it wash over him. When the light changed, they moved again. The taxi glided past Central Park, where trees dripped gently onto glistening benches. The air through the window smelled faintly of earth and rain-soaked leaves. Arnold watched a boy in a newsboy cap race along the sidewalk, kicking through puddles. His laughter echoed faintly through the cab's half-open window. "Used to bring my daughter here," Arnold said. "She'd feed the pigeons, chase them till she tripped, then laugh like falling was part of the game." The driver smiled. "Kids don't mind falling. They know the ground isn't so bad." Arnold nodded thoughtfully. "Adults forget that." They reached the edge of the Upper West Side, where brownstones rose behind iron railings, slick with water. The late sunlight filtered through gaps in the buildings, striking the windows in soft gold. Arnold tapped the window gently. "You can stop here." The cab eased to the curb beside a bakery with fogged windows. Arnold handed the driver a folded bill. "You sure?" the man asked. "You've still got time on the meter." Arnold smiled. "Time's the one thing I'd rather not count anymore." The driver laughed. "That's the best advice I've heard all day." Arnold stepped out, the pavement cool beneath his shoes. The bakery's door was propped open slightly, and the warm smell of bread drifted out. Yeast, butter, sugar melting into air. He paused at the threshold, breathing it in, and then continued walking toward the corner. The street was busy again. Vendors called from their carts. Children darted between puddles, and couples walked arm in arm beneath awnings. Yet everything still glowed faintly from the storm, as if the rain had given the city back its reflection. At the intersection, a yellow cab splashed through a shallow pool, sending arcs of water across the asphalt. The droplets sparkled in the light before falling back, tiny comets burning out on impact. Arnold smiled at the sight. Life, he thought, was made of moments like that, small, brilliant, and gone before you could name them. He reached for his pocket and found a half-smoked cigarette from earlier. Lighting it, he leaned against a lamppost and watched the city move. Across the street, a man stood under another awning, adjusting his tie. Their eyes met briefly, two strangers connected by coincidence and rain. The man nodded once. Arnold returned it, both acknowledging something unspoken about surviving the day. The taxi stopped beside him, its roof light glowing like amber glass. The driver leaned out. "Need a lift, old-timer?" Arnold exhaled smoke and smiled. "Not yet." "Suit yourself," the man said, pulling away. A splash from his tires caught the curb, spraying tiny drops onto Arnold's coat. He laughed quietly, brushing them off. The laughter felt good, unforced, young somehow. He realized it was the same sound he used to make before the years had turned so serious. The city seemed to hear it too. Its rhythm shifted, softening around him. As twilight deepened, the lamplights brightened, and the windows along the avenue glowed amber. The air shimmered, with a thin veil of steam rising from the grates. Somewhere, a saxophone played again, slow, soulful, patient. Arnold took one last drag of his cigarette and flicked it into a puddle, watching the smoke curl upward before fading. He straightened his coat and looked around. The world seemed newly drawn, every corner shining, every face distinct. He began to walk again, not hurried, not wandering, just moving. The city's rhythm met his steps, like an old friend keeping pace. As he passed a cafe window, he caught his reflection once more. An older man, yes, but softened by rain and laughter. Behind that reflection, he saw warmth. People gathered over coffee, the glow of lamps, the curve of ordinary happiness. He smiled. Then, at the end of the block, he saw another light flicker. A small shop with a record spinning in the window, the label barely visible under the glare. But the sound, the sound was unmistakable. It was a melody from his youth, a vinyl song that once played through a long ago Sunday morning in his apartment, when life still smelled of bread and beginnings. The sign above the door read Henderson's Music Shop. Arnold's heart lifted. He adjusted his hat, crossed the street, and reached for the handle as the first piano notes drifted through the crack in the door. Slow, graceful, and somehow waiting just for him. The chime above the door of Henderson's Music Shop rang softly, a delicate sound almost lost beneath the hum of the record spinning inside. The air smelled faintly of varnished wood, cardboard sleeves, and the sweet tang of vinyl warmed by old lamps. Dust particles shimmered in the amber light that pooled across the worn wooden floor. Arnold paused just inside, his hat still in hand, letting the sound envelop him. The melody came from a record player near the back, soft piano notes rolling like quiet rain, followed by a saxophone that sighed with memory. The song was familiar. He couldn't name it yet, but his heart seemed to remember before his mind caught up. Afternoon. A voice called from behind the counter. Arnold turned to see a woman in her 50s, sleeves rolled up, glasses perched halfway down her nose. Her hair was tied with a red scarf that gave her the air of someone who had seen the world but refused to hurry through it. "Good afternoon," Arnold said. "I didn't realize you were still open." She smiled, adjusting the volume on the turntable. "For as long as the records spin, we're open. You look like a man who knows his way around good music." Arnold chuckled, setting his hat on the counter. "I used to. I've been out of practice." She gestured toward the record player. "That one sound familiar to you?" He listened again. The melody swelled, the saxophone joined by a soft brush of drums. The rhythm steady but tender. Suddenly it struck him. He remembered that song, Chet Baker. He said softly, "I fall in love too easily." 1949, maybe. Her eyes twinkled. "You've got an ear. This is an early pressing. Not many left that play this smooth." Arnold smiled faintly. "I remember hearing this once, a dinner party on Riverside Drive. We thought we were so sophisticated. Music does that. she said. It tricks us into thinking we're timeless. He nodded, and for a while, we are. The woman leaned against the counter, watching him with a curious smile. You in town for business? No, Arnold said. I suppose I'm in town for remembering. She tilted her head. But that's good business too. He walked slowly between the aisles, each step creaking beneath him. The rows of records stood like sentinels, voices of another era waiting to be played again. He ran his fingers along the sleeves, reading names that felt like old friends. Ellington, Holiday, Sinatra, Armstrong. Each one carried a story, a night, a moment suspended in melody. He stopped when he reached the classics section. A familiar album caught his eye. The Ellington Band at the Savoy. The cover had faded, the edges softened by time. He remembered that night clearly, the smell of smoke, the hum of excitement, his wife's laughter blending with the brass. Her hand had been warm in his. Arnold lifted the record gently from its slot. Would you mind if I heard this one? The woman smiled knowingly. Not at all. She took it from him and slipped it onto the turntable, setting the needle with practiced grace. The first note struck, a slow piano line, then a cascade of horns bright and alive. Arnold closed his eyes. He was 25 again, standing in the glow of the Savoy's lights, the air thick with perfume and jazz. The world had felt infinite then. The record crackled softly between measures, a small imperfection that only made it more real. He opened his eyes and met the woman's gaze. Still plays beautifully, she said. Better than memory, Arnold replied. They stood quietly through another verse. Outside, the last traces of sunlight filtered through the shop window, reflecting off the brass instruments displayed on the back wall. Trumpets, clarinets, a single saxophone that gleamed like a kept promise. The woman poured coffee from a thermos and offered him a cup. You look like someone who could use something warm. He accepted gratefully. You read me well. They sipped in companionable silence, the record spinning its golden spell. You know, she said after a while, people still come in looking for new things, but the ones who stay, they always end up at the old shelves, looking for something they already had once. Arnold nodded slowly. The trick is realizing it's still here waiting. Maybe that's why I never closed the shop, she said. Every time I think about retiring, someone walks in and remembers something worth saving. Arnold smiled. Then, I'm glad I walked in. The record reached its final track. The saxophone softened. The drums faded to a heartbeat. When it ended, the needle clicked in the center, repeating its quiet rhythm. The woman lifted the needle and looked up. Would you like to take it home? He hesitated. You should keep it. You're its guardian. She laughed softly. Every song needs a second life, Mr. Arnold. Well, Arnold, I think this one's meant to travel again. He considered the offer. The record was worn, its cover creased, but its sound, its soul, was intact. He nodded. All right, I'll take it. Though I can't promise my old record player still works. She slipped the album into a paper sleeve and handed it over carefully. Music's patient. It'll wait until you do. He paid her, then lingered near the counter, reluctant to leave. The shop had the stillness of a church after prayer, quiet, sacred, alive. As he reached for his hat, she said, the city's good at forgetting, but sometimes it gives back the pieces you're ready for. Arnold paused. Do you think so? I've seen it happen, she said. usually on rainy days. He smiled. Then today's a blessing, she laughed, waving as he stepped out into the cooling evening. Play it loud, Arnold. Let the city hear it again. The bell jingled behind him, and the door closed softly. The air outside was crisp, touched with the faint sweetness of autumn. He tucked the record under his arm, its paper sleeve rustling in the breeze. Traffic murmured down the avenue. A few cabs rolled by, their headlights painting gold streaks on the wet street. Across the road, a small diner's neon sign buzzed faintly, spelling coffee and pie. The world had slowed to its evening rhythm, steady, forgiving, peaceful. Arnold turned the record over in his hands as he walked, tracing the worn edges with his thumb. He imagined playing it again in Claire's apartment that night, the familiar melody filling a new space, binding old and new moments together. He stopped at the corner where the lamplight shimmered against the puddles. The wind carried the faintest echo of the song still playing behind the closed door of the shop. The trumpet reached one last note before fading into silence. Arnold looked up at the city's skyline, breathing in the cool, rain-washed air. Still beautiful, he murmured, still playing. Then, with the record tucked safely beneath his arm, he began walking toward the avenue where the lights of evening taxis blinked in rhythm, with the pulse of New York, alive, steady, and waiting for its next song. The city was deep in its golden hour when Arnold stepped out of Henderson's music shop. The rain had left behind a clarity that made every color seem deliberate. Red awnings glowed, sidewalks glimmered like polished mirrors, and the sky was an uneven blue, fading into rose. The wind carried the smell of roasted chestnuts from a corner stand, and a trace of perfume from passers-by hurrying home before dusk. Arnold walked north with the record tucked beneath his arm. Each step felt lighter now, as if the pavement had learned his rhythm. The hum of traffic rose around him, the city's heartbeat steady and forgiving. When he reached Columbus Circle, he stopped to watch the taxis weaving around the fountain, their reflections waltzing in the shallow water. He thought suddenly of Claire. He hadn't called her since morning. She'd asked him to meet her for dinner, but they hadn't settled on a time. A faint guilt tugged at him. She worried easily. He spotted a small telephone booth near the corner of 59th and Broadway, its glass streaked with dried rain. The light inside flickered, warm against the growing dusk. He stepped in, setting the record gently on the small metal shelf. The faint smell of rust and coin lingered in the air. He pulled a dime from his pocket, fed it into the slot, and dialed the number from memory. It rang twice before her voice answered, clear, a little breathless, the sound of home itself. "Dad, you all right?" He smiled. "I am, sweetheart. Just enjoying the city's company." She laughed softly, the tension melting from her voice. "I was about to call you. I figured the rain might have kept you indoors." "Quite the opposite," he said. "I think it kept me alive." "You've been out all day?" "Since dawn," he admitted. "Saw the market district, walked through the old neighborhoods, even found the cafe we used to visit when you were little, the one with the blue awning and the good pie." Claire's voice warmed. "You mean the one where Mum used to make us share a slice, because sweet things taste better together?" "That's the one." For a moment neither spoke. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with everything they didn't need to say. "Are you tired?" she asked. "A little, but in the best way." He looked out through the booth's fogged glass. "How's your evening looking?" "I just finished grading papers. Dinner's still on, if you're up for it." "I wouldn't miss it," he said, 7 sound good? Perfect, she said. You remember how to get here, right? He laughed. I may be old, but I can still find my way around Manhattan. I'll believe that when you're on my doorstep, she teased. He could hear her smiling through the line. Claire, he said after a pause, I stopped by a record shop today. Found something special. Oh, an Ellington album, one your mother loved. We used to play it on Sunday mornings. Her voice softened. The one with Solitude, that's the one. I haven't heard it in years. Then we'll play it tonight, he said, for her. The quiet between them stretched gently, full of shared memory. I'm glad you came back, Dad, she said finally. I know it wasn't easy. It's easier now, he replied. The city's different, but somehow it still knows my name. She laughed again, light and fond. You and New York, two old souls refusing to slow down. He smiled. That's one way to see it. Her voice came through faintly, on her end. Perhaps her husband, asking something in the background. I've got to set the table, she said. Should I expect you around 7? 7 sharp, he promised. Save me a seat by the window. It's yours. He hesitated a moment before hanging up. Claire? Yes. Thank you for inviting me home. Always, Dad. Always. The line clicked softly, the dial tone humming low and steady. Arnold stood for a while, the receiver still in his hand, listening to that quiet mechanical hum. It was the sound of connection, the kind that stretched across years and distance. When he finally hung up, he caught his reflection in the booth's glass. The street behind him glowed with neon signs for diners, theatres, bars just beginning to open for the evening crowd. The city looked alive again, radiant and young. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like its ghost. He felt like its participant. He stepped out of the booth, record in hand, and slipped back into the flow of pedestrians. The night air was brisk, brushing cool against his face. He passed a line of taxis idling near the curb, their roof lights blinking like fireflies. The drivers leaned out of windows, calling destinations, trading jokes across lanes. At the corner, one cab caught his eye. A yellow checker with a slightly dented fender and a driver who looked barely 30. The young man was humming softly to the radio, some upbeat tune about love and luck. Arnold opened the door and leaned in. West 74th, please. The driver nodded. You got it. The cab joined the stream of traffic, heading uptown. The rhythm of the wheels on the wet pavement felt almost musical, like the continuation of the record he carried. Street after street passed by in shimmering reflection, bookstores closing, couples huddled under awnings, delivery men whistling to themselves as they loaded carts. Arnold rested his head against the seat, watching the world move by in pulses of light. The city outside no longer felt hurried. It seemed to move at his pace, breathing with him. At a red light, the driver turned down the radio. You from here, sir? Arnold nodded. Born and raised, spent half my life trying to leave, the other half missing it. The driver grinned. Sounds like love to me. Maybe it is. The light turned green. The taxi rolled forward again, and the skyline opened ahead. Central Park to the right, apartment lights glimmering beyond like constellations. Arnold thought of Claire's apartment, of her laughter, her careful hands setting the table, the warmth waiting behind that familiar door. The thought steadied him. The city, for all its chaos, had delivered him exactly where he needed to go. As they crossed 72nd Street, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, leaving the clouds tinged with lavender. The first stars blinked faintly above the skyline. Hesitant but present, the driver pulled to the curb in front of a red brick building with ivy crawling up the facade. "Here we are," he said. Arnold handed him a few bills. "Keep the change." "Thanks, sir," the driver said. "Have a good night." "I intend to." Arnold stepped out, holding the record like something sacred. The evening breeze carried the faint smell of dinner from nearby apartments, garlic, bread, the promise of warmth. He adjusted his hat, climbed the steps, and pressed the buzzer marked Claire H. Through the glass door, he saw a shadow move. His daughter, hurrying to greet him. Her outline was unmistakable, her movement familiar as heartbeat. He smiled as she opened the door. "Dad," she said, her eyes bright. "You found me." "Always," he replied. The warmth from inside spilled into the hall, carrying laughter and the clinking of dishes. Arnold stepped through the doorway, the city's noise fading softly behind him, and on the hall table, a turntable waited by the lamp needle ready, light low, the space beside it clear for the record he held. The apartment smelled like rosemary and roasted chicken, the kind of warmth that belongs to evenings well prepared. Arnold set his hat and record on the small table by the door, while Claire came forward, wiping her hands on a linen towel. She looked every bit her mother's daughter, same calm eyes, same quiet efficiency, but her hair was streaked with faint grey, and that somehow made her even more beautiful. "Come in, Dad. You're just in time," she said, her voice lilting with affection. He stepped closer and took her into a brief embrace. "You've made it cozy here. It's small, but it feels like home," she replied. "And besides, the city makes the walls seem bigger. You can hear the world breathing if you leave the windows open." He smiled. "You sound like me, 30 years ago." Claire laughed softly. Well, someone had to inherit the sentimentality. The dining table was set for 3, though Arnold noticed only 2 plates filled. The third was empty, its silverware perfectly aligned. He raised an eyebrow, and she caught his look. "I set one for Mom," she said simply. "It felt right tonight." Arnold nodded slowly, his throat tightening in quiet gratitude. She'd like that. You always had her sense of grace. Claire waved him toward the chair nearest the window. "Sit before everything gets cold. I made your favorite roasted chicken with lemon and thyme. And I didn't burn the potatoes this time." He chuckled, settling in.
You've come a long way since your college cooking experiments.
"Those were learning experiences," she said, smiling. "Every fire alarm is just an enthusiastic teacher." The apartment window overlooked a stretch of 74th Street, where the lights from passing cars painted golden streaks across the walls. The rain outside had thinned to a mist again, soft enough to make the reflections blur into watercolor. Claire poured them both a glass of wine. "So," she said, taking her seat, "tell me about your day. I want to hear everything." Arnold took a sip, the wine rich and mellow. "It started with coffee and rain," he began. "The kind of rain that feels like the city's heartbeat. I walked through the old financial district, saw my office building still standing, met a few strangers who felt like memories I hadn't met yet, and I found this." He reached for the record sleeve on the hall table and laid it on the sideboard beside the lamp. The light caught the faded lettering. Claire's eyes widened. Is that? He nodded. Ellington, the Savoy recording. She smiled, her expression softening into something wistful. I remember you and Mum dancing to that one in the living room. She'd hum along even when you told her she was off key. She wasn't, he said quietly. She just liked pretending she didn't know the song as well as she did. They both laughed gently. Then Claire served the meal, the plates steaming, the clatter of forks and the low hum of the city outside filled the silence comfortably. Halfway through dinner, she asked, was it strange being back downtown after all these years? Arnold considered. Strange, yes, but not heavy. It's quieter now. I used to think the city roared all the time, but maybe I was just the one making the noise. Claire nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes I think New York grows older with us. It stops shouting and starts listening. He smiled. Then maybe it's finally my age. She poured more wine, the light catching the glass in soft flashes. Did you go by the park? I did. The pond still glitters the same way after rain, and the vendors still pretend they're out of change. Claire laughed, shaking her head. Some traditions never die. For a few moments, they ate quietly, the soft ticking of the kitchen clock marking time between breaths. The rhythm of ordinary life wrapped around them gently. Arnold looked at her across the table. The light on her face, the ease in her posture, the kindness that seemed effortless. You've built something good here, he said. I've had good examples, she replied. You and Mum taught me that home isn't a place. It's a way of paying attention. He nodded slowly.
Your mother used to say that every time she rearranged the furniture.
They shared another laugh. After the plates were cleared, Claire went to the small record player by the window. Shall we? She asked. Arnold's heart lifted. Please. She slipped the vinyl from its sleeve, careful as if it were glass, and placed it on the turntable. The first soft crackle filled the room, a whisper of time itself. Then the horns rose, rich and golden, carrying the memory of another life into the present. Arnold closed his eyes. He was back in that apartment decades ago. The laughter, the slow dance, the world outside blurred by evening rain. He could almost feel her hand again, warm in his. When he opened his eyes, Claire was watching him. You still remember every note, she said softly. Some songs remember us, he replied. They sat together, listening. The record spun, steady and alive, filling the apartment with a kind of gentle eternity. When the track ended, Claire didn't lift the needle right away. The record hissed in the groove, a tiny sound like rain against a window pane. She smiled faintly. I love that part, she said. It sounds like the world catching its breath. Arnold nodded. Or maybe like it doesn't want to let go. She turned off the player, and the quiet that followed was almost musical. Outside, the rain began again. Soft, rhythmic, comforting. Claire rose to clear the glasses, but Arnold stopped her with a hand on her arm. Leave them, he said gently. Let the night settle. She looked at him, and for a moment, time seemed to fold. The young father and the grown daughter, sharing the same glance, the same unspoken gratitude. Do you ever miss it? She asked. The old days? Not as much as I used to, he said. These new ones, they feel like the same melody, just slower. She smiled, leaning down to kiss his forehead. That's a lovely way to put it. He reached for her hand, squeezing gently. You and your mother taught me how to listen for the music, even when it changes. The rain deepened. A soft applause against the glass. The lamplight trembled in reflection. Arnold leaned back in his chair, the warmth of wine and memory settling through him. Outside, the taxi's headlights swept across the wall, tracing gold over the framed photos. Claire as a child, her mother laughing beside her, the skyline rising behind them like a promise. He smiled at the image, then looked at his daughter again. You know, he said, this city sounds better through your window. Maybe it's because you're finally still long enough to hear it, she teased. Maybe, he said, laughing softly. They listened to the rain together. The world beyond them fading into a slow, luminous hush. And in that quiet, the record on the table caught the last flicker of lamplight, its black surface gleaming, ready to play again when morning returned. Dinner's warmth lingered long after the plates were cleared. The apartment seemed to glow from within, the soft lamplight brushing every surface with honey tones. Outside, the rain persisted in a whisper, polite and rhythmic, wrapping the night in its steady lullaby. Claire had brought a blanket to the sofa and 2 cups of tea that steamed faintly in the golden light. Arnold sat near the window, gazing out at the rain-slick street. You know, he said, I used to watch nights like this from my office, 30 floors up. The city looked like a chessboard, all light and movement. But from here, he gestured toward the window, where droplets raced each other down the glass. It feels human again. Claire smiled, curling up on the sofa. That's because you can finally hear it breathing. Arnold chuckled. You always were better with words than I was. She tilted her head. I think I got that from Mom. She used to narrate everything she saw. Look at that couple arguing under one umbrella, she'd say. Or, the street lamps look tired tonight. He laughed softly. Yes, she gave every inanimate thing a story. Even her teapot had moods. Claire's eyes shone. She'd be happy you came back. I think she's been walking with me all day, Arnold said. In the rain, in the reflections. It's strange it doesn't feel like remembering her. It feels like she's just around the corner. For a while they said nothing. The rain filled the silence between them, punctuated by the occasional honk of a distant taxi. The city had quieted, content to listen to its own heartbeat. Claire took a sip of tea. Do you ever wish you'd never left New York? Arnold leaned back, thinking, no, he said finally. Leaving was part of loving it. You can't understand this city until you've missed it. I used to think it was a place that demanded too much, but it gives you back everything you're willing to see. She smiled, her expression soft. That sounds like you. How so? You always saw everything, even when things went wrong. You found a way to describe them as lessons. I used to think that was your trick for staying calm. Arnold laughed quietly. It wasn't calm, sweetheart. It was practice. She looked at him with a mix of pride and tenderness. You know, I used to think the city was too big for us. After Mum died, I wanted to move somewhere smaller, but somehow every street still feels like her voice is in it. I guess that's what home is, places that remember you. Arnold turned toward her. And people, he added softly. People who keep the stories alive. A clock ticked in the background. Slow, reassuring. The sound folded neatly into the rain's rhythm, turning the apartment into a kind of gentle timekeeper. Claire stretched and stood, crossing to the record player. One more for the night? He smiled. You read my mind. She flipped through a small stack of vinyl beside the turntable. Sinatra or Ella? Arnold's eyes twinkled. Ella, always Ella. The needle touched down, and a familiar voice filled the room, warm, effortless, as if the song had been waiting for them. Dream a little dream of me. Arnold's hand tapped lightly on his knee. Keeping time, Claire hummed along softly, her voice blending with the record's crackle. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful. When the song ended, she left the needle resting in the groove again, letting the faint hiss play on. It feels right not to rush the silence, she said. Silence deserves its applause, Arnold replied. They both smiled, the quiet between them, companionable and kind. Outside, the city's glow shimmered against the wet streets. From their window, Arnold could see the reflection of a neon sign flickering from a nearby diner. Open late. The light blinked like a heartbeat, steady and forgiving. He rose from his chair and stood by the window, teacup warm in his hands. Funny, he said. When I was young, the city was something to conquer. Now it's something to listen to. Claire joined him. Maybe that's what happens when you stop rushing. Maybe, he said. But I think the city changes with us. It grows gentler if you let it. She leaned against the frame beside him. Do you think you'll stay this time? He thought about it. I don't know, but I think I've stopped leaving. Her smile was quiet, knowing, that sounds like home to me. A gust of wind brushed against the window, scattering rain across the glass in delicate patterns. Claire traced one droplet with her finger. You know, she said, I used to think rainy nights were lonely, but tonight they feel like company. Arnold looked at her, eyes warm. That's because they're full of voices. The city's hers, ours. She rested her head briefly on his shoulder, and they stood like that for a moment. Two figures framed by the window light. The city their silent witness. After a while, Arnold noticed the clock again. It's late, he said softly. Stay the night, Claire replied without hesitation. You can have the guest room. It's small but cozy, only if you promise not to make breakfast at dawn. No promises, she said, grinning. You know I still wake up with the city. He laughed. Then I'll match you for coffee. They began turning off lights, moving through the apartment's soft dimness. The record player spun quietly in the corner, the needle circling in the final groove, steady as a heartbeat. As Arnold reached the hallway, he paused at the photographs on the wall. His wedding day, Claire as a toddler with paint-smeared hands, a Christmas dinner long past. Each frame seemed to hum faintly, with life, as if memory were a sound just below hearing. Claire came to stand beside him. You kept all of these, he said. I couldn't throw them away, she answered. They make the walls talk. Arnold smiled. Then we'll never run out of conversation. She squeezed his hand. Good night, Dad. Good night, sweetheart. She disappeared down the hall, and he lingered a moment longer before retreating to the guest room. The small space held a single lamp, a quilt folded neatly at the foot of the bed, and a window cracked open, just enough to let in the sound of rain. The scent of lavender drifted faintly from somewhere unseen. Arnold placed the record on the nightstand beside him, running his hand gently over its worn sleeve. Then he sat on the edge of the bed, taking off his shoes slowly, as if the day deserved to be put away with care. Through the open window, the city breathed, cars humming distantly, rain whispering along the rooftops, the soft murmur of late-night footsteps. It was music of a kind, the kind he'd been chasing without knowing it. He lay back against the pillows, the ceiling faintly illuminated by the glow from the streetlights outside. His mind drifted, images of the cafe, the bookstore, the woman with the broken umbrella, the jazz player under the awning. Each moment threaded together like notes in a quiet song. The rain's rhythm deepened. Arnold closed his eyes, smiling faintly. Still here, he murmured to the city, to the night, to himself. And as the lights outside flickered, their glow caught the edge of the record on the table, turning it gold for an instant, like a promise that tomorrow would hum the same gentle tune. The morning began softly, as if the city were reluctant to wake. A pale grey light slid between the curtains, brushing the guest room in quiet tones. The air smelled faintly of rain and coffee brewing somewhere beyond the door. Arnold stirred beneath the quilt, the sound of the city returning to its morning rhythm. A taxi horn here, a dog bark there, footsteps on wet pavement. The world was stretching, yawning, beginning again. He lay still for a moment, letting the calm hold him. His body felt the pleasant heaviness that follows deep rest, and his mind drifted lazily between dream and memory. The rain had stopped during the night, leaving behind a kind of hush. A city washed clean. He sat up slowly and glanced toward the window. A slice of sunlight had managed to break through the low clouds, landing squarely on the record sleeve, resting on the nightstand. Ellington at the Savoy. The gold letters gleamed faintly, as if the morning had chosen to greet it first. Arnold smiled. Still the first one up, he said to the record, his voice low, amused. From the kitchen came the comforting symphony of breakfast, the clink of porcelain, the faint whistle of the kettle, and Claire humming under her breath. It was a tune he recognized, Ella Fitzgerald again, that same soft optimism carried from last night. He dressed, buttoning his shirt slowly, each movement deliberate. His hands trembled slightly, not from age or cold, but from the tender peace of being exactly where he was meant to be. When he stepped into the hallway, the apartment was filled with the smell of toast and coffee. Claire stood by the window in her robe, sunlight catching the edges of her hair. She turned and smiled. "Good morning, Dad." "Morning," he said, his voice still rough from sleep. "You start the day early as ever." She poured him a cup of coffee, the steam rising between them. "Old habits," she said. "The city doesn't really sleep, you know. It just whispers differently." He took the cup and inhaled the aroma. Strong, simple, grounding. "You make it better than I remember," he said, taking a slow sip. "Or maybe I just stopped rushing through it." Claire laughed. "You used to drink it like it was a race." Arnold smiled, settling into the chair by the window. Outside, the city was already alive. Delivery trucks groaned along the curb. Vendors unfolded their carts, and pedestrians hurried with the same determined grace he had once known so well. But today, it all seemed gentler, like the city was holding its breath just a little longer before diving into the day. "Looks like a fine morning," he said. Claire nodded. "They say the rain's gone for a while. You brought the sun back." "I'll take credit for that," he replied with mock solemnity. She placed a plate of buttered toast on the table, then sat across from him. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," he admitted. "It's strange. I used to wake up thinking about things undone. Today, I just woke up thinking about breakfast." Claire smiled. spreading jam on her toast. That's the secret to contentment, I think. Focusing on one meal at a time. Arnold chuckled. You sound like your mother again. She'd like that, Claire said softly. The words hung gently between them. Neither reached for more conversation right away. Instead, they let the silence stretch comfortably, broken only by the hum of the city outside and the faint clatter of the kettle cooling. After a while, Claire asked, "What are you planning for today?" Arnold looked out the window, where a man in a tan overcoat hailed a cab under the morning sun. "I don't know," he said thoughtfully. "Maybe I'll take a walk, see the park again. Maybe stop by that little cafe on 5th with the blue awning, the one you mentioned last night." He nodded. "Yes. I want to see if they still have that old radio by the counter." Claire grinned. "You'll have half the city memorized by the end of the week." He lifted his coffee in a toast, and not a single regret. She laughed, shaking her head. "I'll never keep up with you." Arnold reached across the table, resting his hand over hers. "You already do. You just walk quieter." Her eyes softened. "I'm glad you came back, Dad." "I am too," he said simply. A soft breeze slipped through the open window, carrying with it the faint chorus of street sounds, the distant bell of a bicycle, the shout of a vendor, the first faint honk of impatience. Life was moving again, and Arnold felt himself moving with it. After breakfast, Claire tidied the dishes, while Arnold retrieved the record from his room. He held it carefully, tracing the edges one more time before placing it beside the turntable. "Think we can manage one last listen before I head out?" She smiled, always. The record spun again, its first notes filling the apartment like a familiar sunrise. The horns rose, confident and alive. Arnold closed his eyes, letting the rhythm pulse through him. He remembered everything at once. The rain on the cafe window, the woman with the broken umbrella, the jazz player under the awning, the city's laughter, and his own rediscovered joy. It wasn't nostalgia, it was continuation. The song wasn't about what had been lost, but about what kept returning. Claire watched him, her smile quiet, almost reverent. When the song reached its final chorus, she crossed the room and hugged him from behind. "Don't go too far today," she murmured. "Dinner's on me tonight." He laughed softly. "You have yourself a deal." The last note faded, replaced by the soft, rhythmic hiss of the record's center groove. Arnold let it play a while longer before lifting the needle. "Perfect," he said. "Even the silence sounds like music." He gathered his coat and hat, ready to step into the day. The city outside gleamed with possibility, the wet pavement drying to silver, the trees shaking loose the last beads of rain, the air smelling faintly of bread and promise. Claire walked him to the door. "Call me when you're heading back," she said. "I will," he replied. "And don't be surprised if I bring pie." "Apple, I hope," she said. "The only kind worth walking for." They laughed softly together, and then he stepped out into the hallway. The air was cooler there, tinged with the faint echo of life behind every apartment door. He paused before the stairs, listening to the hum of the building, the murmur of pipes, the soft buzz of someone's radio 2 floors below. Even that sound felt familiar, grounding. When he reached the street, the sunlight had brightened into full day. The puddles had dried into dull silver patches, and the sky stretched open, wide and forgiving. He turned up his collar and began walking towards Central Park, his steps steady and unhurried. Behind him, somewhere above, Claire's window opened. He could imagine her standing there, watching him disappear into the rhythm of the morning. One more New Yorker among millions, yet utterly himself. Arnold smiled, tipping his hat toward the sky. "Another day, old friend," he said softly, as if to the city itself. "Let's make it count." And the city, as if in reply, answered him with the faint bright clang of a streetcar bell. Central Park greeted Arnold with the hush of post-rain calm. The trees glistened, their leaves still jeweled with droplets, and the paths shimmered beneath the newborn sunlight. The air was crisp but gentle, touched with the scent of damp earth and morning pastries from nearby vendors. Pigeons strutted along the walkways, as if nothing extraordinary had happened the night before, though the whole park seemed cleaner, brighter, more deliberate somehow. He entered through the familiar stone archway near 72nd Street, cane tapping softly against the wet pavement, though he didn't truly need it. He liked the sound, the steady rhythm of each step, grounding him in the moment. Around him, joggers moved in pairs, couples shared quiet laughter, and a painter unfolded an easel beneath a tree whose branches were still dripping silver. Arnold inhaled deeply, the chill of autumn settling comfortably in his lungs. The city's lungs, he thought. The park always had been, even in his younger years. When business consumed everything, he had sometimes escaped here on his lunch breaks. Back then, he'd hurry through with his mind already in the next hour. Now, he let each breath stretch until time itself seemed to exhale beside him. He followed the winding path toward the lake. Ducks floated lazily across the still surface, leaving ripples that caught the sunlight. The water mirrored the skyline, tall, proud, softened by mist. Near a bench, an elderly couple fed crumbs to the birds, their movements tender and synchronized. The man's scarf fluttered in the breeze, and Arnold smiled to himself. "That's how it should be," he murmured, two rhythms becoming one. He found an empty bench beneath a willow tree and sat, the wood cool and damp beneath him. From here he could see almost the whole sweep of the park, the joggers, the carriages, the faint sparkle of morning dew. He rested his hands on his cane, letting the sun warm the backs of them. Across the lake, the street musician had set up a cellist. Judging by the size of the case, the man began to play, and the low resonant notes drifted across the water like a tide. Each sound seemed to vibrate with patience. Arnold closed his eyes, letting the music carry him. He thought of Sam, the saxophonist he'd met yesterday, and how his laughter had risen between drags of smoke. Different instrument, same truth. Music was what remained when words grew tired. The piece changed tempo, a hint of melancholy in the bow's drag. Arnold could almost imagine the cellist's expression, a quiet smile, maybe a nod to the weather, to the city's endurance. He tapped his fingers lightly against his knee in time. After a while, a small voice interrupted the melody. "Excuse me, sir, are you saving this seat?" Arnold opened his eyes. A little boy, perhaps 8 years old, stood there clutching a toy boat. His coat was buttoned crookedly, his hair a wild halo of curls. "No, young man," Arnold said, "all yours." The boy climbed up beside him, setting the boat on his lap. "My dad says the water's too cold to sail it," he said matter-of-factly. "But I think boats don't mind the cold." Arnold chuckled. "I imagine you're right. They're built for weather." The boy looked up at him, studying his face. "Did you used to sail boats?" "Not the kind that float," Arnold said. "The kind that chase dreams. Sometimes they sink, sometimes they reach shore. The boy frowned slightly, considering this. Did yours reach? Arnold smiled. Eventually, I had to build a few new ones along the way. The boy nodded seriously, as if this made perfect sense. He held up his toy, a small wooden boat, painted blue and red. My grandpa helped me make this. He says wood remembers the hands that shape it. That's a very smart grandpa, Arnold said. The boy grinned proudly. He says I'll remember him every time I fix it, when it breaks. Arnold felt something tighten gently in his chest, a warmth edged with longing. Then you'll carry him with you forever. The boy seemed satisfied by that. He hopped off the bench and held the boat up to the light. When the sun's higher, I'll sail it anyway. Good idea, Arnold said. Sometimes you just have to test the wind yourself. The boy waved and ran toward his father, who stood a few yards away, smiling faintly at the exchange. Arnold tipped his hat in greeting. The man returned the gesture, the small silent politeness of strangers who understood gratitude. The cellist's piece drew to a close. The last note lingered above the lake, like a sigh before dissolving into applause from scattered listeners. Arnold joined in, clapping softly. The musician bowed, his breath visible in the crisp air. For a long moment after, Arnold simply sat there. The park was waking faster now. Children chasing pigeons, a vendor shouting about fresh pretzels, a dog shaking water from its coat. The hum of life gathered around him, layered and gentle. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded napkin, the one he'd sketched on at the cafe. The pencil lines were faint, but still visible. Rooftops, a lamppost, a lone figure beneath an umbrella. He'd almost forgotten it. He smiled, smoothing the paper on his knee. It felt like holding a small piece of the city in his hands. He looked up again, at the skyline beyond the park. You and I, he murmured to it. We keep rewriting each other, don't we? The breeze lifted, carrying the scent of damp leaves and distant roasted peanuts. It rustled the willow above him, a sound like whispered agreement. Arnold chuckled softly. Thought so. A pair of tourists approached, map in hand, speaking hurriedly in French. They asked for directions to the zoo, and he pointed them north with an easy smile. You'll know it by the laughter before you see it, he said. They thanked him and went on their way, their accents lingering in the air like music. He stayed another half hour, watching the light shift across the lake. The water had turned a delicate shade of silver blue. The trees reflected in long, gentle strokes. Every so often, a leaf fell, spinning slowly before touching down, like punctuation at the end of a sentence. Finally, he rose. The wooden bench creaked faintly, a small farewell. He took one last look around, the chalice packing up, the boy launching his boat despite his father's protests, the skyline glimmering with late morning brightness, and smiled. He started walking back toward the avenue. The air had warmed enough for him to remove his hat, letting the sun touch his hair. Near the park's exit, he paused beside a hot pretzel cart and bought one, handing the vendor a bill larger than the price. Keep the change, he said. Thank you, mister, the vendor replied, voice cheerful. Beautiful day, huh? It is, Arnold said, every drop of it. He tore a piece from the pretzel as he walked, the salt sharp on his tongue, the bread still warm. The city noise grew again, the low rumble of buses, the chatter of morning crowds, the metallic rhythm of construction in the distance. It didn't feel like chaos anymore. It felt like accompaniment. At the corner of Fifth Avenue, he stopped to watch the traffic. A line of taxis gleamed yellow in the sunlight, and for a moment he thought he saw the reflection of his younger self in one of their windows, a man in a grey suit rushing towards something he could never quite name. The image flickered and was gone, replaced by the present, slower, fuller whole. He smiled and crossed the street, the park receding behind him, but its peace still walking beside him, step for step. By the time Arnold reached Fifth Avenue, the morning light had deepened into a clear, steady brightness. The air felt lighter, and every passing taxi seemed to hum in tune with the rhythm of the city's rebirth after rain. The clouds had retreated entirely, leaving the sky washed pale and limitless. It was the kind of day that made even the oldest buildings look like they'd been freshly polished by the storm. He turned a familiar corner and saw it, the Blue Awning Cafe. Its colour was softer now, faded to the hue of worn denim, but it was unmistakable. The same small bell hung over the door. The same brass handles glinted in the sun. Even the faint aroma drifting through the open window, fresh coffee mingled with butter, carried him back decades. Arnold paused at the entrance, one hand on the doorframe, his reflection meeting him in the glass. Behind the reflection, a few patrons sat scattered at the tables. Young couples, an older man reading the Times, a waitress balancing plates with the grace of someone who knew the weight of every breakfast. He smiled and stepped inside. The bell chimed softly, and with it came a flood of warmth and familiarity. The cafe was smaller than he remembered, but somehow more intimate. The wooden floor creaked in the same reassuring way, and a row of glass jars filled with biscotti lined the counter. A gramophone in the corner played a slow tune, somewhere between jazz and lullaby. A woman behind the counter looked up. "Morning, sir," she said. "Table for one?" "Please," Arnold replied. She led him to a seat near the window. The table's surface was smooth from years of use, the kind that carried the polish of countless elbows, coffee rings, and conversations. He placed his hat beside him and looked out the window. The street outside shimmered faintly, the city caught between reflection and motion. "Coffee?" the waitress asked. "Yes, black," he said, "and perhaps a slice of whatever pie smells that good." She smiled. "Apple. Came out of the oven 10 minutes ago. Then I'm in luck." When she left, Arnold leaned back, soaking in the soft hum of morning life, the spoon against porcelain, the low murmur of voices, the faint clatter from the kitchen. It all formed a kind of everyday symphony. He traced a finger along the edge of the table. Years ago, this had been their table. He and his wife would come here on slow Sundays after church, ordering 1 slice of pie and 2 coffees. "Sweet things taste better when shared," she'd always say. When the waitress returned with his order, the coffee steamed dark and fragrant, and the slice of pie glistened under a thin glaze. "Enjoy," she said, setting it down gently. "Thank you," he replied, his voice softer than he meant it to be. He took a slow sip. The bitterness of the coffee balanced perfectly against the sweetness of the apple. He let the flavor linger before swallowing, feeling the years between then and now blur into a single, gentle line. From his seat, he could see a reflection in the cafe window, the city behind him, sunlight cutting across the glass, and for just a moment, it looked as if another figure sat across from him. A woman, perhaps, smiling faintly, her hand resting where his once had been. Arnold blinked, and the image vanished, leaving only the brightness of day. But he didn't feel startled. He simply nodded once, as if acknowledging an old friend's passing visit. The waitress returned with a napkin and refilled his cup. "You look like you've been coming here for years," she said conversationally. "Maybe longer than you think," he said, smiling, though the awnings faded a bit. She laughed. Everything in New York fades eventually, but it fades with style. "True enough," Arnold said. "That's what keeps people coming back." At the next table, a young couple was sharing a small breakfast. They leaned close together, laughing quietly, their hands occasionally brushing as they reached for sugar or jam. Arnold couldn't help but watch, not with envy, but with a kind of tender recognition. He had once been that man, eager and unaware of how quickly moments become memories. He smiled and returned to his coffee. The door chimed again, and a burst of laughter entered with the sound of the street. A man stepped in, shaking off the last drops of the morning. His coat was worn, his hat tilted, and in his hand was a saxophone case. Arnold's heart lifted. "Sam?" The man blinked, then grinned when he saw him. "Well, if it isn't Mr. Market," he said, walking over. "Didn't expect to find you haunting cafes before noon." Arnold laughed. "I could say the same. Sit down, if you're not rushing to save the city with jazz." Sam slid into the chair opposite him, setting the case beside the table. "My gig got pushed. Weather scared off the crowd last night. Thought I'd hunt for coffee instead." "Then you found the right place," Arnold said. "Pie?" "Don't mind if I do," Sam replied, signaling to the waitress. "2 forks, 1 slice," he added with a wink. "Rain taught me sharing's good luck." Arnold chuckled, shaking his head. "You've learned fast." They ate in companionable quiet. For a while, the faint strains of the gramophone floating around them. The conversation came easily afterward. Talk of the city, of music, of small mercies. Sam spoke of late-night sets and empty pockets, but smiled as though those things were virtues. Arnold listened, amused by the rhythm of his words. "You ever play uptown?" Arnold asked. "Now and then," Sam said. "Mostly down here, though. Uptown crowds like polish. I'm more rust and rhythm. That's what the city needs more of," Arnold said. Sam grinned. "You talk like a poet, old man." "Just a listener," Arnold said, "and a collector of stories." The waitress brought another pot of coffee, and they lingered, 2 men from different tempos, sharing the same beat. Outside, the traffic had slowed, and the sunlight turned gentler, leaning toward afternoon. Sam eventually checked his watch and sighed. "Got a matinee gig near Times Square. You ever come by that way? Ask for the 5 spot. I'll play something worth your walk." "I'll do that," Arnold said, shaking his hand. When Sam left, the bell over the door chimed again, softer this time, as if reluctant to let him go. Arnold remained seated, finishing the last sip of his coffee. The cafe had grown quieter now. Just a handful of patrons left. The gramophone played one final verse, the piano fading into the hum of the city outside. He looked down at the half-eaten slice of pie and smiled, reaching into his pocket. He left 2 bills under the saucer, more than enough for the meal, and a small silver dollar beside them, the same one he'd once given Margaret. "Let's see who finds you next," he murmured. The waitress called after him as he left. "Come back soon, sir." "I think I will," he said, tipping his hat. Outside, the air had changed again, no longer cool, but comfortably mild. The blue awning rippled slightly in the breeze, scattering sunlight across the glass, and Arnold stood for a moment beneath it, eyes closed, listening to the pulse of the street. The city sounded like music again. He smiled, turned his collar up, and began walking west toward the river, where the afternoon light shimmered like a promise, waiting to be kept. By mid-afternoon, Arnold reached Riverside Drive, where the city loosened its collar. The streets widened, the air tasted faintly of salt and metal, and the Hudson shimmered ahead like a sheet of tempered glass. The sun leaned westward now, gilding the river in slow gold. Every ripple looked alive. He crossed the street and descended the narrow path toward the promenade. The familiar scent of wet stone and distant boat fuel met him like a memory. A breeze ruffled his coat, cool but not biting. He walked slowly, savoring the rhythm of footsteps on the old pavement. The river always carried a kind of honesty. No matter the noise of the city behind it, the water remained unhurried, unconcerned. It moved at its own pace, restless but grounded. Arnold rested his hand on the railing and let the cool metal steady him. The tugboat churned by, its wake breaking into white threads that stretched across the current. On the far side, the cliffs of New Jersey rose faintly blue in the distance, soft and far away, like an old postcard. He had crossed that river hundreds of times by ferry, each trip once a necessity, now a quiet symbol of arrival. Still here, he murmured to the water, still moving. The wind carried his words away, but he didn't mind. Some thoughts were better whispered into motion. Farther down the promenade, a group of children were playing, their laughter breaking against the stillness like small bells. One boy had a paper sailboat, bright white against the dark water. Arnold smiled as the boy knelt, placed the little vessel near the edge, and let it go. The boat wobbled, caught the breeze, and began to glide downstream. The boy clapped once, triumphant. The sight drew a faint ache of recognition. That same boy could have been him, 70 years ago, somewhere along this very river, convinced that paper and hope could outpace the current. He continued walking until he reached a bench facing the water. The wood was cool, worn smooth by countless seasons of waiting. He sat down and unbuttoned his coat, resting his hat beside him. The late sunlight filtered through the trees, falling in dappled patches across the pavement. From somewhere nearby came the faint notes of a harmonica, hesitant at first, then sure. The tune was simple, almost childlike, but it suited the river's mood. Each note dissolved into the wind, leaving silence just long enough to make you miss it. Arnold leaned back, eyes half closed. The warmth of the sun on his face felt like forgiveness. He had lived through noise, through ambition, through loss, and somehow it had all brought him here, to this quiet hour beside the river. He thought of Claire. She'd be finishing her afternoon classes soon, already thinking about dinner. He pictured her humming softly as she chopped vegetables, the record spinning in the background. The image comforted him. Life, he realized, had a way of continuing without asking for permission. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his small notebook, the one he'd carried for decades. Inside, the pages were filled with numbers, sketches and fragments of phrases. Near the back, he found a blank page. He took his pen and wrote slowly, his handwriting looping and deliberate. The city breathes in rhythms. Rain, light, footsteps, laughter. We belong to it, when we listen. He paused, then added another line beneath it. Today, the river sounds like gratitude. He closed the notebook and set it beside him, smiling. A woman's voice broke the stillness. Beautiful, isn't it? Arnold turned. A woman in a long grey coat stood a few steps away, her hair pulled back neatly, her eyes reflecting the gold of the afternoon. She held a small camera in her hands. It is, he said, the kind of view that doesn't need to change. She nodded. I come here every week, try to catch the same photo, but the light's never quite the same. That's the trick of it, Arnold said. The river never repeats itself. She smiled, taking the seat at the other end of the bench. You sound like someone who's been watching it a long time. Long enough, he said, chuckling. Since before half the skyline behind us existed. Then you must have seen everything, she said. Not everything, Arnold replied. Just enough to know the rest keeps surprising you. She laughed softly. I like that. They sat quietly for a moment, both watching the water. The woman lifted her camera and took a few shots. The gleam on the river, the passing tugboat, the reflection of clouds stretched thin. Do you ever take pictures? She asked. I used to, Arnold said. Now I just collect moments in my head. They're lighter to carry. That's a photographer's secret too, she said, smiling. A gust of wind passed through, rattling the leaves. The harmonica player nearby shifted to a slower tune. Something wistful, almost familiar. Arnold tilted his head, recognizing the melody. Is that Moonlight Serenade? The woman nodded. My father used to play it on the piano every Sunday. Mine too, Arnold said softly. It's a good song for remembering. They listened until the final note faded into the breeze. When silence returned, it wasn't empty, it was tender, shared. The woman stood, adjusting her camera strap. I should go before the light's gone, she said. Arnold rose as well, tipping his hat slightly. Thank you for the company. She smiled. Thank the river. It always brings good company. He watched her walk away, her footsteps soft against the path. When she disappeared around the bend, he sat again, his reflection faintly rippling in the water below. The sunlight was lowering, now, sliding toward evening. Across the river, the buildings had turned amber, their windows flashing brief sparks, as if waving goodbye to the day. Arnold stayed until the first shadows began to lengthen. The breeze had cooled, carrying the faint metallic scent of twilight. Somewhere behind him, a train whistle sounded, a long wistful note cutting through the hum of the city. He placed his notebook back into his pocket and stood, his knees protesting slightly, before settling into the familiar rhythm of movement. The river whispered beside him, unbroken, eternal. As he reached the steps leading back up to the street, he turned for one last look. The paper boat the boy had launched earlier drifted far downstream, a tiny white dot against the gold, still afloat, still brave. Arnold smiled and whispered, "Sail well." Then he climbed the steps toward the waiting lights of the city, the sound of the river trailing him like a soft refrain. By the time Arnold reached the upper street, the city had slipped into its softest colors. The air carried that twilight hush, half music, half memory, when day and night trade hands. Storefront lights flickered on one by one, glowing through the crisp air like lanterns. The smell of roasted nuts, fresh bread, and faint perfume wove together, the city's quiet way of saying good evening. Arnold adjusted his hat and began walking east, toward Claire's apartment. His shadow stretched long on the pavement, meeting those of strangers and street lamps. The sounds of the afternoon had mellowed into a hum. The chatter of shopkeepers closing registers, the rhythmic shuffle of feet, the faint call of a vendor offering one last bag, fresh pretzels. He passed a florist, sweeping fallen petals from the sidewalk. "Long day?" Arnold asked. The man looked up, smiling, wearily. "A good one. Rain makes people sentimental. They buy more flowers. Maybe they're remembering someone," Arnold said. "Or hoping to be remembered," the florist replied, tucking a stray petal behind his ear before returning to his broom. Arnold walked on, thinking how every corner of the city seemed to breathe with small stories. Even the pigeons gathered on the wires looked like punctuation marks in an unfinished poem. He turned onto a quieter street, lined with brownstones. Here, the city softened completely, the noise replaced by laughter from windows, the clink of dinner plates, and the faint echo of a record player playing something slow and gentle. He paused beneath a lamppost, its light warm against the cooling air. From the steps of a nearby building, an older couple sat arm in arm, sharing a single paper cup of coffee. They didn't speak, just watched the street as if the night were enough conversation. Arnold smiled and tipped his hat as he passed. The woman raised her cup slightly in greeting. It struck him how much of life unfolded in small silences, the kind that required no explanation, only presence. A few blocks later, he came upon a newsstand still open, the smell of ink and paper mingling with the scent of rain. The vendor, a man in his 30s, with sleeves rolled up, looked up from his stool. "Evening, sir. Paper for the night?" Arnold nodded. "The Times, please." The vendor handed it over, the paper still faintly damp. "You look like you belong in one of these," he said, grinning. "Maybe the finance section." Arnold chuckled.
Once upon a time.
He unfolded the front page and scanned it absently. Markets rising, politics shifting, sports celebrating. The world kept spinning, indifferent and alive. He thanked the man and slipped a coin onto the counter. "Keep the change." "Thank you, sir. Stay dry out there. I've made peace with the weather," Arnold said. He continued on, tucking the paper under his arm. The sky above had turned a deep cobalt, with only a few stubborn streaks of rose lingering at the horizon. The first stars blinked faintly above the skyline, tentative and bright. A faint tune reached him then, an accordion somewhere down the block. The melody was familiar, the kind played by street musicians who didn't expect applause but played for the sake of sound itself. Following it, Arnold found a man standing beneath a fire escape, hat turned upside down for coins. The tune was As Time Goes By. Arnold stopped a few paces away and listened. The player's fingers moved with a tired elegance, coaxing each note like an old secret. The song folded the evening into itself, melancholy, tender, inevitable. When it ended, Arnold clapped softly. The man looked up, surprised, then smiled. "Thank you, sir. Not many stop to listen these days." "Then they're missing something worth hearing," Arnold said, placing a few coins in the hat. "That song's older than both of us." The musician laughed. "Then it must be wiser too." Arnold nodded, then turned to go. The melody lingered behind him, following him like a faint echo down the block. He reached the corner of Claire's street as the lights flickered on across the avenue. The air had cooled further, and a thin layer of mist clung to the pavement. He stopped at the curb, looking down toward the river one last time. The water there caught the fading light, reflecting it in long, trembling streaks. Across the street, a bakery had just pulled its final batch of bread from the oven. The warm, yeasty scent curled through the air. Arnold stepped inside. The bell above the door rang softly, and the baker, a plump man with flour on his apron, turned from the counter. "Evening, friend. What can I get you?" "One loaf, please. Whatever's warmest." "Ah, then you'll want this." The baker wrapped a golden brown loaf in waxed paper. "Just came out." Arnold paid, accepting the bread with a grateful smile. "You're saving my dinner. Then you'll eat well tonight," the baker said. "The city always feeds those who walk slowly." Arnold laughed softly. "Then I've earned a feast." Back outside, the loaf's warmth seeped through the paper into his hands. The smell carried him back again, to Sundays long gone, when Claire's mother would slice bread and hum by the window. The memory didn't ache this time. It rested gently in his chest, like a photograph that had stopped fading. As he neared Claire's building, he could already see the familiar glow from her window, a golden rectangle against the dusk. His pace slowed. There was comfort in knowing exactly where to return to, and beauty in the act of arriving. When he reached the steps, he paused and looked back down the street. The city stretched behind him, lights, laughter, stories overlapping. Somewhere, a saxophone began to play. It wasn't Sam, but the tune carried the same warmth, the same unspoken gratitude for being alive here now, in this hour. Arnold smiled. "You're still singing New York," he whispered. "Don't stop." Then he climbed the steps. Claire opened the door before he could knock. "I was just about to call you," she said, laughing. "I had a feeling you'd time it with dinner." He held up the loaf. "And dessert, if you count bread." She took it, the warmth still radiating through the paper. "You walked again, didn't you?" "Habit dies hard," he said. "Besides, the city wanted company." Claire shook her head affectionately. "You're impossible and punctual," he added, checking his watch, "which is more than I could say years ago." She smiled, stepping aside. "Come in before the soup gets cold." Arnold followed her inside, hanging his hat by the door. The apartment smelled of thyme and slow-simmered vegetables. The record player hummed softly in the corner, spinning a tune he recognized. Solitude once again. He paused, letting the first notes wrap around him. Claire looked up from the stove and smiled knowingly. "You left it on repeat this morning," she said. "Seems it had more to say," Arnold replied. He moved toward the window while she stirred the soup. The city below gleamed like a living constellation. The night breeze drifted in through the half-open pane, carrying the faint scent of river and rain. Arnold placed a hand on the glass. "It's a beautiful evening," he said. Claire joined him, her shoulder brushing his. "It always is when you're home." He smiled. The reflection of father and daughter shimmered against the dark window. Two generations framed by light and memory, and outside, beyond the glass, New York breathed on, calm and alive, preparing to cradle them both in its endless humming heart. Dinner filled the apartment with soft light and the warmth of shared time. The soup steamed gently in the bowls. The bread rested between them on a wooden board, and the faint sound of rain began again, tapping at the windows as if the city wanted to listen in. The lamp on the sideboard glowed amber, its circle of light catching the curve of the record player, spinning Solitude one last time. Arnold and Claire ate without hurry. Each bite, each sound of the spoon against the porcelain felt deliberate, a rhythm built for staying rather than moving. Outside, taxis drifted by like small glowing fish through mist. Somewhere below, a radio hummed in another apartment, faint but kind, threading its tune through the night. "This soup is wonderful," Arnold said, dipping the last piece of bread into the broth. Claire smiled. "It's an old recipe, Mom's." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "I thought so. She used to add just a pinch of thyme at the end." "I still do," Claire said. "Some habits belong to all of us." The words settled warmly between them. The record clicked softly as it reached the groove's center. Claire rose to lift the needle, but Arnold stopped her gently. "Let it play," he said. "I like the sound of the end." She smiled, understanding. They sat for a while longer, listening to that soft, rhythmic hiss, the echo of a song that had already finished, but still lingered, unwilling to disappear. When the last candles burned low, they cleared the table together. Claire moved with quiet grace, collecting plates while Arnold wrapped the bread. The room glowed with that particular stillness only autumn nights bring. The world slowed, content, almost whispering. Claire set 2 cups of tea by the window and said, "You know, it's funny. I used to hate this city after dark. It always felt too big, too loud. But tonight, it just feels awake." Arnold joined her at the window, looking out at the sprawl of lights across the skyline. "That's because you're listening differently now," he said. "The noise becomes music when you stop trying to sort it." They stood together, sipping tea, their reflections faintly superimposed on the city beyond. The rain had lightened to a mist again, the droplets forming delicate streaks against the glass. From somewhere down the street came the laughter of 2 passers-by, sharing an umbrella, the sound small and human beneath the vastness of the skyline. "You ever think you'd come back here?" Claire asked. Arnold thought for a moment. "I didn't think the city would still want me," he said softly. "But I think it always did. It was just waiting for me to walk slow enough to notice." Claire rested her head on his shoulder. "You don't have to leave again." He smiled. "Maybe I never really did." They fell into silence again. The kind of silence that feels like company. On the street below, the blue glow of a diner sign flickered on, and the faint strains of a jazz tune drifted up through the rain. A man laughed somewhere, and the sound curved around the corner, carried by the wind. Arnold closed his eyes briefly, listening. "You hear that?" Claire nodded. "What is it?" "Life," he said, "just continuing." The clock in the kitchen ticked softly toward midnight. The tea grew cooler, the rain steadier. Arnold turned from the window and moved toward the record player. He lifted the Ellington album, its cover still glinting faintly under the lamp, and placed it back on the turntable. Again, Claire asked. "One more time," he said, "for her." The room filled once more with those golden horns, that slow, knowing rhythm. It was a song that didn't demand attention. It invited it. The melody curved through the air like a familiar street, leading somewhere you'd been before, but never quite the same way twice. Arnold sat back in his chair. The music softened his edges, blurred the years between then and now. He could see her in the faint shimmer of the lamplight, her laughter, her perfume, the way she used to tap her foot along to this very record. For a moment, time folded neatly, past and present breathing in the same rhythm. Claire watched him quietly. "You look happy," she said. "I am," he answered. "The city and I finally understand each other." When the final note faded, he didn't move right away. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with every echo the music had left behind. The rain's soft percussion kept time. Claire rose, kissed the top of his head, and whispered, "Good night, Dad." He smiled. "Good night, my dear." She disappeared down the hallway, her footsteps light against the floorboards. Arnold remained seated, gazing out the window. The skyline shimmered like a constellation that refused to rest. He thought of all the places he had walked that day, the bookstore, the cafe, the park, the river, and how each had offered a small conversation, a gesture of belonging. Every step had led here, to this quiet, complete moment. He reached for his notebook on the side table and opened it to the last page. With careful strokes, he wrote, "New York. You and I are old friends again. We've learned how to listen. The rain keeps time, the lights keep watch, and tonight the city hums softly like a lullaby that remembers my name." He set the notebook down and looked once more at the street below. A taxi rolled through the intersection, its lights cutting through the mist, then disappearing into the distance. The city exhaled. Arnold leaned back, the soft hum of the lamp and the steady tap of rain weaving together. The air smelled faintly of tea, wood, and the lingering sweetness of apple pie. He closed his eyes. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. Inside, the record spun in silence, its needle resting at the center, still, patient, ready to begin again when morning returned. And as the last note of the day dissolved into quiet, the city itself seemed to whisper low, eternal, content. "Rest now, I'm still here." Arnold smiled in the dark, as if hearing an old friend speak.